A brand new, $40 million private jet sat completely dead on the hangar floor. The world's best aviation engineers had failed for 6 straight days. A billionaire CEO had just placed a $7 million bet that nobody could fix it. Investors were furious. The media was watching, and standing at the back of the crowd, in a worn work jacket with grease under his fingernails, was a single father nobody had ever noticed before. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to matter. But in exactly 5 minutes, he was going to change everything. If stories like this move you, about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss one. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. The rain had been coming down since before midnight. Owen Callahan noticed it the way he noticed most things, quietly, without saying anything about it. He was already 40 minutes into his commute when the first fat drops hit his windshield, and by the time he pulled his 2009 Ford F-150 into the service lot behind Hargrove International Aviation at 20 past 11, the sky had opened up completely. He sat for a moment with the engine running, listening to rain hammer the roof of the cab, looking at his own reflection in the dark glass. He looked tired. He was tired. He'd been tired for about 3 years now. His daughter, Lily, had been asleep when he left. He'd checked on her twice before going, once after he finished packing her lunch for the next morning, once more because he just needed to see her face. She was 7 years old and slept with both arms thrown out wide, like she was trying to hold the whole bed at once. She looked like her mother when she slept. Owen tried not to think about that too hard on nights like this. He grabbed his thermos, his tool bag, and his jacket from the passenger seat and jogged through the rain toward the service entrance. The Hargrove hangar was the kind of place that made regular airports look like gas stations. It occupied the far eastern edge of a private airfield outside Charlotte, North Carolina, and it had been built to house aircraft worth more money than most small countries' annual budgets. The main bay alone could swallow 4 commercial airliners side by side and still leave room. The ceilings were 60 feet tall. The lighting was the kind of clean, flat, industrial white that made everything look like a photograph of itself. The floors were polished concrete, unmarked and spotless, the kind of floors that made Owen's work boots feel loud even when he was trying to be quiet. He badged in through the side door, nodded at the overnight security guard, a heavy-set man named Gerald, who was working on a crossword puzzle and barely looked up, and made his way toward the locker room. He'd been working here for 11 weeks on a temporary contract, 6 months minimum, maybe longer, depending on how things went. The agency that placed him paid decently enough to keep the lights on and his mother-in-law off his back about moving in with her, which was worth something. The work itself was fine, unglamorous mostly. Routine inspections, maintenance logging, component checks on aircraft that belonged to clients whose names he recognized from the news. He kept his head down, did what was asked of him, and went home. No one in the permanent crew knew much about him. He hadn't volunteered anything and they hadn't asked. That was fine with him. He changed into his uniform, poured the last of his thermos coffee into a paper cup, and walked out into the main bay. That was when he saw it. The aircraft was positioned in the center bay under a bank of portable work lights that had been rolled in to supplement the overhead lighting. Even from 60 feet away, it stopped him. It was a Vantara GX-9, the newest business jet in Sienna Ashford's fleet, delivered to Ashford Aerospace's private division just 17 days ago. Owen knew the model because he'd read the spec sheet when it arrived, the way he read spec sheets for every aircraft that came through, out of habit more than anything else. The GX-9 had a price tag of $42 million and a range of 7,000 miles and was supposed to represent the pinnacle of American private aviation. It was also, right now, sitting completely inert on the hangar floor surrounded by equipment, cables, laptops, and roughly a dozen men who all looked like they'd stopped sleeping sometime last week. Owen recognized a few of them. He didn't know their names, but he knew their type: senior engineers, the kind who wore their credentials like armor, expensive shoes, rolled-up sleeves, the particular body language of men who were used to being the smartest people in any room and were currently not feeling that way. He slowed his walk without meaning to. "Hey!" A hand appeared on his shoulder. He turned. It was Marcus, one of the permanent hangar crew, a tall man from Atlanta with a good-natured face and a habit of knowing everything before anyone else did. "You just getting in?" Yeah, Owen said. What's going on with the GX-9? Marcus let out a long breath. Brother, you do not even want to know. Tell me anyway. Marcus looked around, then lowered his voice like they were discussing something illegal. That aircraft has been down for 6 days. 6. Won't start, won't run diagnostics clean, throws a full warning cascade every time they try to turn her over. Ashford's people flew in their top engineering team 4 days ago. Those guys couldn't figure it out. Yesterday, they brought in a contractor from Germany. I'm serious, flew the man in from Frankfurt. And he took one look at the data and called it unprecedented. His word, unprecedented. Owen looked at the aircraft again. Huh. It gets better, Marcus said. This morning, Sienna Ashford herself showed up. Owen had never seen Sienna Ashford in person. He'd seen her on magazine covers. Forbes, twice. The cover of Wired. She was 30 years old, which was notable because she was also the founder and CEO of a company worth $11 billion, which was more notable. She'd started Ashford Aerospace at 23 with a prototype drone design and a patent her graduate school professor had told her wasn't viable. That professor had apparently sent her a very different kind of email 3 years later. She's here now, Owen said. Standing right over there, Marcus said, tilting his head toward the far side of the aircraft. And she made an announcement about an hour ago. What kind of announcement? Marcus smiled. He had the look of someone delivering news he'd been waiting all night to deliver. $7 million cash prize to anyone who can identify and fix whatever is wrong with that aircraft. Open challenge. Media already picked it up. There are reporters outside right now. Owen was quiet for a moment. $7 million. $7 million? Owen looked at his paper cup of coffee. He looked at the aircraft. That's a lot of money, he said, and went to start his shift. He spent the first 2 hours of his shift doing what he was actually assigned to do, logging maintenance records on 3 other aircraft in the secondary bay, replacing a worn hydraulic seal on a Cessna Citation that had come in 2 days ago, and updating the consumables inventory in the parts room. Ordinary work. He did it carefully and without rushing, the way he did everything. Around 1:30 in the morning, he drifted back through the main bay. The crowd around the GX-9 had grown. He counted at least 20 people now, maybe more. Some of them he recognized as aviation professionals. Some of them looked like they'd arrived in suits that cost more than his truck. There were cameras, not just news cameras, but the kind that serious investors and corporate media used. Cables snaked across the polished floor. Someone had set up a folding table with coffee and bottled water, which struck Owen as oddly considerate given the circumstances. He positioned himself near a secondary equipment rack and watched. The German contractor was at a laptop connected to the aircraft's primary diagnostic port, scrolling through error logs with the expression of a man deeply reconsidering his career choices. 2 of Ashford's engineers were arguing quietly near the nose, gesturing at a tablet between them. A man in an expensive suit, someone's lawyer or investor, Owen guessed, stood to one side talking on a phone, and whatever he was saying, he did not look happy about it. And then there was Sienna Ashford. She was smaller than the magazine photos suggested, which was the first thing Owen noticed. She was wearing dark slacks and a simple gray blazer with the sleeves pushed up, and her hair was pulled back, and she had the focused, slightly coiled energy of someone who had been awake for too long and was running on discipline instead of sleep. She was standing with her arms crossed, listening to one of her engineers explain something, and her expression was the particular kind of controlled that meant she was being careful not to show what she actually felt. Owen watched her for a moment. He'd worked for enough bosses to read that expression. She was scared. Not panicked. She wasn't the panicking type, he could tell that much from 40 feet away, but genuinely scared. Not just about the money or the schedule or the optics, about the aircraft itself, about what it meant that 17 days after delivery, her company's flagship product was sitting dead on the floor and no one could explain why. He thought about that. Then he went back to his inventory work. At 2:15 in the morning, he walked past the GX-9 again, and he stopped. He wasn't sure why he stopped. He hadn't planned to. He'd been heading to the break room to refill his coffee, but something made him slow his pace, and then slow it more, and then stop entirely about 15 feet from the aircraft's port engine nacelle. He stood there, and he listened. There was a sound. Very faint. Not a mechanical sound exactly, more like an acoustic characteristic, The way a room sounds different when a window is open versus closed. The hangar had its own ambient noise, the hum of climate control, the electrical drone of the lighting banks, the distant sound of rain against the metal roof. But underneath all of it, coming from somewhere inside the GX-9's left engine assembly, there was something that didn't belong. He listened to it for about 30 seconds. Then he tilted his head slightly and listened to it for another 30 seconds. It wasn't a vibration. It wasn't a rattling. It was more like a resonance, the specific tone that a component makes when it isn't seated the way it's supposed to be seated. Owen had learned to hear sounds like this a long time ago, in a different life, in a different hangar, working for nothing because he needed the hours and the knowledge more than he needed the money. He set his coffee cup down on the equipment rack. He crouched down, slowly, and looked at the underside of the nacelle. He stood back up and looked at the engine inlet from a different angle. He walked around to the starboard engine and listened to that one, comparing. He walked back to the port side. He stood very still. "You're not supposed to be this close to the aircraft." He turned around. One of the engineers, mid-40s, gray at the temples, the kind of man who said things like "actually" and "to be precise" a lot, was looking at him with the expression usually reserved for someone who'd wandered into the wrong party. "Sorry," Owen said. "I was just—" "The area around this aircraft is restricted to credentialed engineering personnel," the man said. "I don't know what your assignment is tonight, but it isn't here." "Yes, sir," Owen said. He picked up his coffee cup and walked away. He thought about what he'd heard all the way to the break room. At 3 in the morning, the crowd around the aircraft had thinned slightly. The investor with the phone had apparently left. The German contractor was sitting in a folding chair with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, which was not a promising sign. 2 of the engineers were taking a break at the folding table. Sienna Ashford was still there. She was standing near the aircraft's tail, holding a tablet, not looking at it. She had the look of someone doing math in her head. Not aviation math, but the other kind. The kind that had to do with what happened to a company's reputation when its flagship aircraft couldn't get off the ground. Owen walked over. He wasn't entirely sure what he was doing. He was a temporary mechanic 11 weeks into a contract. This was not his problem, and not his aircraft, and not his money. He had a daughter at home, sleeping with her arms thrown wide and a lunch already packed for tomorrow, and a life that required him to not do things that were likely to get him fired. He walked over anyway. "Excuse me," he said. Sienna Ashford looked at him. Her eyes were sharp, the kind of sharp that came from paying attention to everything, all the time, for years. She looked at his uniform, at his badge, at his face. "Yes?" "I'm Owen Callahan. I work the night maintenance shift. I'm a temporary contract hire." A pause. "Okay." "I've been listening to your port engine," Owen said. "I think I know what's wrong." There was a beat of silence that felt longer than it was. Then something moved behind her eyes. Not quite amusement, but something adjacent to it. She'd heard a lot of things in the last 6 days. She'd heard theories, diagnoses, confident declarations from men who billed $500 an hour and then couldn't deliver. She'd reached the specific emotional territory that lies on the other side of frustration, where everything begins to feel slightly unreal. "You've been listening to the engine," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "Our diagnostic systems have logged approximately 4,000 error codes in the last 6 days, she said carefully. "We've had 3 separate teams of engineers, 2 proprietary software packages, and the best independent aviation consultant in Europe all try to identify this fault. And you've been listening." "I know how that sounds," Owen said. "Do you?" "Yes, ma'am." Another pause. Behind her, one of her engineers had noticed the conversation and was watching with the particular expression of a man who was about to say something dismissive. "Mr. Callahan," Sienna said, "this aircraft represents a significant portion of my company's operational credibility. If I let a maintenance worker approach it based on what he thinks he heard while walking past, and something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong," Owen said. "I won't touch anything without your permission. I just want to look." "Harrison," she called, without turning around. The gray-templed engineer appeared at her shoulder. "Do you know this man?" Harrison looked at Owen with the recognition of someone who had already told him to go away once that night. "He's contract maintenance, night shift. He says he's heard something in the port engine." Harrison's expression said everything he was too professional to say out loud. "Ms. Ashford, I don't think that's 5 minutes, Owen said. They both looked at him. Give me 5 minutes with the aircraft, just to look. I won't touch anything without you standing right there watching. If I'm wrong, I'll go back to my assignment and you'll never hear from me again. A long silence settled over the small group. Somewhere above them, rain drummed steadily on the hangar roof. Sienna Ashford looked at him for a long moment. Then she almost smiled. Not warmly, not dismissively, but with the particular expression of a person who has run out of better options and knows it. Fine, she said. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Callahan. From somewhere behind Owen, someone laughed. He didn't turn around to see who. He walked to the port engine with his tool bag and a penlight. He did not rush. He moved with the kind of deliberateness that came from long practice. Not performing confidence, just being careful. He crouched beside the engine inlet and turned on his penlight and looked. From behind him, he could feel the weight of people watching. He heard someone say, quietly, but not quietly enough, "Is this a joke?" He heard Harrison say something under his breath to another engineer. He heard the specific silence of Sienna Ashford not saying anything. He tuned all of it out. He was looking at the forward thrust reverser actuator bracket assembly. It was a component most people would never think twice about, a structural mounting assembly that sat deep inside the engine compartment, designed to hold the thrust reverser actuator in its correct operational position. It was not a complicated component, it was not expensive, and it was the kind of thing that, if improperly installed during final assembly, would create a cascading chain of false readings through multiple systems, because every interconnected sensor that relied on accurate positional data from that component would receive slightly wrong information and respond accordingly. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, without turning around, "Can someone get me the assembly specification sheet for this engine's thrust reverser installation? The one from the original build documentation." A long pause. Then he heard someone moving. A minute later, a tablet appeared beside him. He glanced at it, confirmed what he suspected, and handed it back. He looked at the bracket again. He thought about the sound he'd heard. He thought about the resonance, the specific tone of a component that was close but not quite right. I thought about all the expensive diagnostic equipment that had been connected to this aircraft for 6 days, generating 4,000 error codes and pointing at everything except the one simple thing hiding underneath all of them. He straightened up. "Ms. Ashford," he said, "I need your permission to remove an access panel and make a single adjustment to the port engine assembly. The entire process will take approximately 4 minutes. I want 2 people watching me every second, and I want everything documented." Sienna Ashford walked over and stood beside him. She looked at where he was pointing. "That bracket assembly?" "Yes, ma'am." "That's been checked. Our team checked every component in that section." "I know," Owen said. "They were looking at it wrong." Harrison appeared at her other shoulder. "Ms. Ashford, I strongly advise against allowing an uncredentialed—" "He has credentials," she said, and Owen realized she'd already looked at his badge while they were talking earlier, already done the math about who he was and what he was qualified to do. "Mr. Callahan, walk me through exactly what you're going to do before you touch anything." So he did. He described the fault in plain, precise language. He explained what the incorrect installation would cause, which systems it would affect, and why the diagnostic equipment had been chasing symptoms instead of sources. He talked for about 2 minutes. When he finished, the hangar was very quiet. Sienna looked at Harrison. Harrison looked at the engine. He had the expression of a man doing a calculation he wasn't enjoying. "He's not wrong about the mechanics," Harrison said finally. Slowly. Like each word cost him something. "If the bracket is seated at the offset he's describing, it would explain the sensor cascade. It would explain all of it," Owen said quietly. Sienna turned to look at him directly. "Do it," she said. "2 observers, full documentation. You have my authorization." Owen opened his tool bag and went to work. He removed the access panel in 40 seconds. He made the adjustment in 3 minutes and 10 seconds. He replaced the panel and stepped back. He looked at Sienna Ashford. "Start her up," he said. There was a moment, a strange, suspended moment where no one moved and no one spoke, and the rain kept falling on the roof far above them, and the lights were very white and very still. Then someone moved toward the aircraft's systems panel. Owen stood with his hands at his sides and waited. The engines came to life. The sound filled the hangar, clean, even, exactly the way a $42 million aircraft was supposed to sound. Every warning light that had been showing on the systems panel went dark, one after another, until the display read nothing but green. No one said anything for a moment. Then the applause started. Owen didn't look at the crowd. He was looking at the aircraft. He was watching the instruments, listening to the engine tone, making sure. A tech standing at the diagnostic terminal looked up and said, in a voice that sounded like he still didn't quite believe it, "All systems nominal. Full clean read." Owen bent down and picked up his tool bag. He zipped it shut. He straightened up. Sienna Ashford was watching him. Her arms were at her sides now, not crossed. She looked like a person who had just seen something she hadn't expected to see, trying to decide what it meant. "Mr. Callahan," she said. "Yes, ma'am." That was 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Owen almost said something. He didn't. He just nodded once, picked up his coffee cup from where he'd set it on the equipment rack, and found that it had gone completely cold. He drank it anyway. He was thinking about Lily, asleep at home with her arms thrown wide. He was thinking about the fact that none of this was over, that the aircraft had been fixed, but the question of why it had been broken in the first place was still unanswered, and what he'd seen in those build documents during those 2 minutes before he started working had planted something cold and specific in the back of his mind. But that was a problem for the next few hours. Right now, the engines were running clean. He stood in the bright light of the hangar and listened to them sing. The applause lasted maybe 90 seconds before the questions started. That was how it always went, Owen had noticed, in rooms full of people who needed to be in control of things. The shock wore off fast, and then came the need to explain it, to categorize it, to fit it into something they already understood. The moment the GX9's engines settled into that clean, even hum and the diagnostic panel went green, the hangar shifted, from silence to applause to noise, all within the span of about 2 minutes. People were talking over each other. Someone had pulled out a phone and was filming. The German contractor, whose name Owen still didn't know, had walked up to the diagnostic terminal and was staring at the readout with the focused intensity of a man who was either deeply relieved or deeply embarrassed, possibly both. Owen stood off to the side and let it happen. He'd found a spot near the equipment rack where he wasn't quite in anyone's way and wasn't quite in anyone's line of sight either, which was exactly where he preferred to be. He'd refilled his coffee from the break room urn on his way back, actual hot coffee this time, and he was holding it in both hands and watching the room the way he watched most things, which was quietly and from a slight distance. Marcus appeared at his elbow. "Man," Marcus said. "Yeah," Owen said. "Man," Marcus said again, like that covered it. Maybe it did. Harrison, the gray-templed engineer, had moved to the port engine and was examining the access panel Owen had replaced. He had a pen light and a camera and the particular body language of someone doing a very careful audit. Owen didn't blame him. He'd have done the same thing. If someone he'd dismissed had just walked in and solved the problem, his entire team had been unable to crack for 6 days. The first thing he'd want to verify was that the fix was actually real, and not some temporary patch that was going to fail at 38,000 feet. It was real. Owen knew it was real, but Harrison would need to see that for himself, which was fine. What was not fine, or rather, what was sitting at the back of Owen's mind like a stone he'd swallowed, was what he'd seen in those build documents. He turned it over while the room buzzed around him. He'd asked for the assembly specification sheet on impulse, mostly to confirm his suspicion about the bracket, and he'd confirmed it fast enough that he'd handed the tablet back in under a minute. But in that minute, he'd seen something else. Something that had nothing to do with why he'd asked for the document in the first place. He'd seen a revision date. The assembly specification he'd been handed was dated 11 weeks ago, which made sense because the GX9 had been in its final assembly phase 11 weeks ago. But the document showed a revision stamp, which meant it had been modified after the original filing. Normally that was routine. Specifications got updated. Engineers made improvements. Revision stamps were standard practice. What was not standard was that the revision had been made 4 days into final assembly to a component that should have been installed on day 1. He turned that fact over and looked at it from different angles while the engineers celebrated around him, and the more he looked at it, the less he liked the shape of it. Owen Callahan. He looked up. Sienna Ashford was walking toward him with the direct, unhurried stride of someone who always moved like she'd already decided where she was going. She'd taken her blazer off at some point, or maybe she hadn't been wearing it, he wasn't sure, and there was a slight color in her face that might have been the warmth of the hangar or might have been something else. She stopped a few feet from him and looked at him evenly. "How long have you been doing this?" "This specific thing?" he said. Tonight was the first time. She almost smiled. "Aviation mechanics. 14 years counting the first 2 when I was basically just handing tools to people." "Where?" "Air Force, first 4 years. Then a few different maintenance contractors. Some commercial, some private." He paused. "I worked for Hargrove's main facility in Denver for 3 years before I got this placement." She was watching him with the focused attention she probably gave to most things. "Hargrove Denver does heavy maintenance on commercial frames, 737s, A320s. "Yes, ma'am." "That's not the same as business aviation." "No," he said. "It's not. But a misaligned bracket assembly is a misaligned bracket assembly, regardless of what's wrapped around it." A pause. She looked at him for a moment longer than felt entirely comfortable. "Why are you working a night shift temp contract at 32 years old if you have 14 years of aviation experience?" Owen looked down at his coffee. It was a direct question, and she'd asked it without apology, which he could respect. "Flexible hours," he said. "I have a daughter. She's 7. I do the day shift at her school and the night shift here." Something moved in Sienna's expression. Not pity. He would have noticed pity, would have felt it like a drop in temperature. Something more careful than that. "Where's her mother?" "She passed," Owen said. 3 years ago." The hangar noise continued around them. Harrison was still examining the engine. Someone was on a phone somewhere. The rain had slowed on the roof, but not stopped. "I'm sorry," Sienna said. She said it simply, without decoration, and he believed she meant it. "Thank you," he said. She shifted slightly, crossed her arms. Back to business, which he also respected. "You earned the prize, Mr. Callahan. $7 million. I announced a public challenge and you met it. My word is my word." "I appreciate that. Is there anything you want to say before I have my team process the paperwork?" Owen looked at his coffee again. Then he looked at the aircraft. Then he looked at Sienna Ashford. "I want to show you something," he said. "In the build documentation." Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes sharpened. "Now?" "Soon," he said. "Before you do anything else with that aircraft. Before you fly it anywhere, or clear it for service, or make any announcements about it being operational." He paused. "I could be wrong about this. I want to be clear about that. I'm a mechanic, not an investigator. And what I'm seeing might have a completely normal explanation that someone in your engineering group could clear up in 10 minutes. But you don't think so." He was quiet for a moment. "No, ma'am," he said. "I don't think so." She looked at him for a long moment. The applause and the conversation and the noise of the room seemed to recede slightly. "All right," she said. "Give me 20 minutes to deal with the media questions outside. Then you and I are going to sit down with those documents." Owen nodded. She turned and walked toward the hangar entrance, where the sound of voices and camera equipment was audible even over the rain. He watched her go and then looked back at the GX-9, which was humming along with the serene indifference of a machine that didn't care what it had caused. He thought about the revision date. He thought about what it implied. He thought about what it meant that a component critical to engine safety had its installation specifications revised mid-assembly, and that nobody had flagged it, and that the aircraft had been delivered and accepted and placed into service. He drank his coffee and didn't say any of this to anyone. Not yet. The 20 minutes became 45, because the media questions outside apparently went longer than expected, and then a man in a very good suit who turned out to be one of Ashford Aerospace's senior vice presidents arrived, and pulled Sienna into a separate conversation that Owen watched from across the hangar and read as tense without being able to hear a word of it. He used the time to do his actual job. He finished the maintenance logs he'd been working on when the night started, cross-checked the parts inventory, and signed off on the citation's hydraulic work. He was meticulous about it, more meticulous than usual, because somewhere in the back of his mind he was aware that the night was not going to end quietly, and he wanted everything related to his actual assignment to be clean and documented. He was in the middle of updating the last log when Marcus came and found him again. "The VP," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from Owen's workstation. "Renner, you know who he is?" "No," Owen said, not looking up. "Dale Renner, VP of Manufacturing Operations. He's been with Ashford Aerospace since the beginning, before Sienna took the company public. Marcus lowered his voice. He and Sienna were arguing, like, not yelling, but the kind of arguing where nobody yells and it's worse. Owen finished the line he was writing. About what? About the aircraft. About you, I think. He doesn't want her talking to you further. Marcus paused. He said something about liability exposure, about not letting unvetted personnel into the investigation chain. Unvetted personnel, Owen said. His words. Owen closed the maintenance log. He looked at Marcus. Where's Sienna now? Sending the media people out. Renner left about 10 minutes ago, got a phone call, and walked out. Marcus tilted his head. He looked unhappy. I imagine he did, Owen said. He sat for a moment thinking about Dale Renner, who had arrived at 2 a.m. in a good suit and had argued with his CEO and then left looking unhappy after receiving a phone call. He thought about what kind of call, at 2 a.m, would make a senior VP of manufacturing operations leave an active engineering crisis. He thought about the revision stamp on the assembly specification document. Marcus, he said, before tonight, when the GX9 first came in, do you know who was managing the maintenance intake? Marcus thought about it. It came in through the corporate flight division. Renner's department handles new aircraft delivery coordination. His team would have done the incoming inspection. His team, Owen said. Standard procedure. New aircraft comes in, the VP of Ops signs off on the delivery acceptance. Owen nodded slowly. He didn't say anything else. Marcus, to his credit, seemed to understand that the conversation had reached a natural endpoint and took himself off to do other things. Owen sat alone at the workstation for a moment. Then he got up and went to find Sienna Ashford. She was in a glass-walled conference room just off the main hangar bay, standing at a long table with 2 people Owen didn't recognize. A woman with a legal pad who was writing quickly and a younger man with a laptop. Sienna looked up when Owen knocked on the glass door and held it open. Sit down, Mr. Callahan. These are 2 of my people. My legal counsel, Nina Park, and my chief technical officer, Daniel Reyes. Owen sat. He put his tool bag on the floor and his coffee on the table and looked around the room. Through the glass wall, he could see the GX9 still illuminated by its work lights, still running. He could hear it, faintly. That clean, even tone. You said you wanted to show me something, Sienna said. The assembly specification document you had your team pull up for me, Owen said, while I was looking at the bracket. Do you have that document available? Reyes typed something on his laptop and turned it to face Owen. Owen looked at it, confirmed it was the same document, and looked up. There's a revision stamp dated 11 weeks ago. Revision R4C. Do you see it? Sienna and Reyes both leaned in. Nina Park stopped writing and leaned in too. There was a pause. That's the mid-assembly revision, Reyes said slowly. That came through as a running change during final build. Who authorized it? Owen said. Another pause, longer this time. Reyes typed something. The authorization signature on R4C is... He stopped. What? Sienna said. It's authorized under Dale Renner's credentials, Reyes said. He had the specific voice of someone being very careful not to conclude something before they had more information. The room was quiet for a moment. That doesn't mean anything by itself, Nina Park said. Running changes during final assembly happen. Renner's position gives him authorization to approve those. Agreed, Owen said. That's not the issue. He pulled the laptop toward him slightly, navigating to the technical section of the document. The revision changed the installation tolerance specification for the thrust reverser actuator bracket. The original spec called for a tolerance of plus or minus 0.2 millimeters during installation. He pointed at the screen. Revision R4C changed that to plus or minus 0.8. Silence. That's 4 times the original tolerance, Reyes said. Yes. Why would anyone do that? Sienna said. She wasn't asking Owen specifically. She was asking the room, or the ceiling, or the situation. I can think of 2 reasons, Owen said. One is that the engineering team discovered during assembly that the original tolerance was too tight for reliable production, that workers were struggling to hit the specification and it was slowing the line, so they widened the tolerance to keep production moving. That happens, Reyes said carefully. It does, Owen agreed. That's the legitimate explanation. The tolerance gets widened, the component gets installed faster, everybody moves on. And the other explanation? Sienna said. Owen looked at her steadily. The other explanation is that the original tolerance was correct and necessary for safe operation, and that when the assembly team had trouble hitting it, maybe because they were behind schedule, maybe because of cost pressure, maybe because of something else, instead of slowing down and solving the problem properly, someone with the authority to revise the specification changed the number to make the non-conforming installation acceptable on paper. The silence that followed was the kind that meant everyone in the room was doing the same calculation and arriving at the same answer. If the bracket was installed at the outer edge of the revised tolerance, Reyes said slowly, working through it, it would be technically compliant with R4C, but it would be at a position that caused the sensor cascade, every warning the aircraft threw. Every single one, Owen said. I corrected it tonight by repositioning it to the original specification. That's all I did. 4 minutes of work to fix a problem that never should have existed. Sienna had not moved. She was looking at the laptop screen with an expression that was very controlled and very careful. Daniel, she said, how many GX9 frames went through final assembly in the last 3 months? Reyes typed. His face did something complicated. 14. 14 aircraft, Sienna said. All delivered. 12 to customers, 2 to our own corporate fleet, including this one. The room was very quiet. I need you to understand what I'm saying, Owen said. He felt the need to be precise about this, to not overstate it. I don't know for certain that the bracket is wrong on the other 13 aircraft. It's possible that this was a single installation error on this specific airframe and the others are fine. That's possible. But given that the specification was changed mid-assembly specifically for this production run, we need to check all of them, Sienna said. She said it flatly, with finality, like a door closing. Tonight, I need you to... She stopped and looked at Nina Park. What do I need to do right now, from a legal and regulatory standpoint? Nina Park had stopped taking notes. She was looking at the table. You need to notify the FAA. Tonight, you need to ground all 14 airframes pending inspection. And you need to preserve every piece of documentation related to R4C before anyone has the opportunity to alter it. She paused. And you need to do all of this before any of it leaks to the press. Because the story right now is that the aircraft was fixed, and if the story becomes something else before you've contacted regulators, that is a much worse situation. Owen looked at the laptop screen again. He thought about Renner, who had left in a hurry after a phone call. He thought about what that phone call might have been, and who might have made it, and what was said. Ms. Ashford, he said, the documentation for R4C, the original revision request, the authorization chain, any internal communications that led to the change. Is any of that stored somewhere that someone outside this room could access and modify right now? Sienna looked at Reyes. Reyes looked at his laptop. His expression shifted from careful to urgent. The production documentation system, Reyes said, is accessed through the operations portal. Anyone with VP-level credentials can... He stopped talking. His hands were already on the keyboard. Get it security on the phone, Sienna said. She wasn't loud about it. She was very quiet about it, actually, which was somehow more serious than loud. Right now. I want access logs for the R4C document folder going back 12 hours, and I want the document set locked against modification with a timestamp that holds up in court. She was already reaching for her phone. Nina, I need the FAA Flight Standards District Office duty number. I have it, Nina said, already scrolling through her own phone. The room went from quiet to motion. Not chaotic motion, but the fast, purposeful kind that happened when competent people understood that a situation had a specific shape and started working its edges. Owen sat back. He realized he was still holding his coffee cup. It was cold again. He set it down and looked through the glass wall at the GX9, which was still running, still clean, still singing in that even tone that meant everything was working exactly as it should. He thought about the 14 aircraft. He thought about 12 of them in the possession of clients, corporations, private individuals, executives, who had no idea that underneath one of their engines, a bracket sat at a position 4 times outside the original safety specification. He thought about what that meant at altitude, at speed. Under the specific stress conditions that existed when an aircraft pushed through turbulence, or executed a hard banking maneuver, or encountered the particular aerodynamic load that nobody thought to plan for but that real flight always eventually produced. He thought about those 14 aircraft, and he thought about Lily, asleep at home, and he thought about all the daughters and sons and parents and ordinary people who might someday sit in the cabin of one of those planes and trust, the way you had to trust when you were 38,000 feet above the ground, that the people who built the thing had done it right. He sat very still. "Mr. Callahan." He looked up. Sienna Ashford was looking at him from across the table. She had her phone in her hand and was clearly about to make a call, but she'd paused. "For whatever it's worth," she said, "you didn't have to say anything. You fixed the aircraft. You earned the prize. You could have taken the money and walked out of here and nobody would have known about any of this possibly until it was too late to matter." Owen looked at her. "That's not a thing I was going to do," he said. "It came out simply because it was simple." She nodded once. Then she made the call. Owen stayed in the conference room for another hour, answering questions from Reyes about the technical specifics of what he'd found and how. He was precise. He used exact language. He described the acoustic signature he'd noticed, the reasoning behind his suspicion, the specific measurement he'd taken when he opened the access panel, the degree of positional variance from the original specification. Reyes recorded everything. Nina Park wrote everything down. At some point, someone brought Owen a sandwich from somewhere, which he ate mechanically while answering questions, because he was hungry and hadn't eaten since 7 the previous evening. The call to the FAA had been made. That process was now in motion. Slow, procedural, inevitable. Sienna had spoken for 20 minutes on the phone in a voice that was controlled and factual and gave nothing away. Owen had heard enough of it to understand that the duty officer on the other end had taken it seriously. A formal notification would be filed by morning. An inspection directive would follow. Around 4:30 in the morning, Reyes closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. He was a careful, precise man. Owen had figured that out in the first 20 minutes. And he had the look of someone whose careful precision had just been overtaken by a situation that was not careful or precise. "Can I ask you something?" Reyes said. "Sure," Owen said. "When you were looking at that document, the assembly spec, you were looking for something specific, the bracket tolerance, and then you saw R4C. He paused. "How long did it take you to understand what you were seeing?" Owen thought about it honestly. "Maybe 15 seconds. Reyes was quiet for a moment. 15 seconds. "I've seen running changes get used to paper over production problems before," Owen said. "Not at this scale, but the pattern is recognizable if you've seen it before." "Where did you see it before?" Owen looked at the window. "Smaller operation. Commercial maintenance contractor in Ohio, years ago. Nothing like this. It was a ground support equipment issue, not flight critical. But the same logic. Schedule pressure, tolerance revision. The problem disappears on paper." He paused. "The company lost its operating certificate." Reyes nodded slowly. He didn't say anything else about that. Outside the conference room, the hangar had gotten quieter. Most of the visitors and engineers had cleared out. The GX-9's engines had been shut down at some point. Owen hadn't noticed exactly when, but the hangar now held only its ambient sounds, the climate system and the lights, and the specific silence of very large machines at rest. Sienna came back into the conference room at 5 in the morning. She looked like a person who had aged slightly in the last hour, which was not a visual impression exactly, but something in the way she carried herself, like the weight of what was happening had found a more permanent address. She sat down at the table and looked at Owen. "The IT security team found access attempts on the R4C documentation folder," she said. "2 of them. Both initiated about 40 minutes after you and I started talking in this room. Both from a device registered to Dale Renner's credentials." Owen said nothing. "The attempts were blocked," she said. "The lockdown Reyes initiated was already in place." "Okay," Owen said. "I've been with this company for 7 years," she said. "Dale Renner helped me build the manufacturing side of it, from 18 employees to over 800. She looked at the table. "He knows where everything is. Every process, every system, every shortcut we ever took, and every one we refused to take." She looked up. "I trusted him." Owen looked at her. He understood in a general way what it felt like to have something you relied on turn out to be different than you thought. He didn't say that. "I'm sorry," he said instead. She looked at him for a moment, then she straightened slightly. "Your documentation of the repair tonight, the maintenance logs, the procedure. Is it complete?" "Yes, ma'am. Time-stamped and filed as standard procedure. I logged every step before I started and updated it as I went." "Is there security footage of the repair itself?" "There's footage of everything in that main bay," Owen said. "I'm aware of where the cameras are. I made sure I was in frame the entire time I was working." She looked at him with something that wasn't quite surprise but was adjacent to it. "You planned for that." "I didn't plan for any of this," Owen said, "but when I realized what might be behind the fault, I thought it was wise to make sure there was no ambiguity about what I did and didn't touch." Nina Park, who had been quiet for the last several minutes, said, from the other end of the table, "Mr. Callahan, for what it's worth, that documentation is going to matter quite a lot in the next few weeks." Owen thought that was probably true. He thought about the next few weeks. He thought about regulatory proceedings and board meetings and the specific kind of institutional turbulence that happened when a major company discovered a problem of this magnitude hidden inside its operations. "I thought about 14 aircraft and 12 clients, and the conversation Sienna Ashford was going to have with each of them. He thought about Dale Renner, who had changed a number in a document to keep a production line moving and had then gone home and gone to sleep and let a $42 million aircraft get delivered with a safety fault baked into its foundation." He was tired. The deep, honest tiredness that came not just from the hour, but from the kind of attention the last few hours had required. The specific mental energy of being precise and careful and thorough when everything in your body wanted to be done. "I should get back to my shift," he said. I've still got 2 hours." Sienna looked at him for a moment. "You don't have to do that." "I do," he said. "I have logs to finish." She looked at him a moment longer. "Then go finish them," she said. "But I need you to come back tomorrow. Later today. I have some things I want to discuss with you that aren't about the investigation." Owen stood, picked up his tool bag. "What time?" 10 o'clock. "Can you manage that?" He thought about Lily's school schedule. Her teacher, Mrs. Adeyemi, had a drop-off window that ended at 8:15. He could make it home, sleep 3 hours, get Lily up and fed and to school, and be back here by 10 if he didn't hit traffic. "I can manage that," he said. He picked up his cold coffee cup out of habit, then set it back down on the table, because there was no reason to carry an empty cup across a hangar at 5 in the morning. "Mr. Callahan," Sienna said, as he opened the conference room door. He looked back. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for the fix, for the rest of it too." Owen nodded. He walked out into the hangar and went back to work. The GX-9 sat silent in the center bay, the work lights still burning around it, patient and enormous in the way that large machines were, indifferent to all the human weight that had gathered around it tonight. Owen walked past it on his way to the secondary bay and ran his hand along the fuselage without quite intending to, just a brief contact, a fingertip drag against the aluminum skin, the way you touch something to remind yourself it was real. It was real. All of it was real, and it was still unfinished, and somewhere out there 11 more aircraft were parked in hangars or sitting on tarmacs, and none of the people who owned them knew what was sitting underneath their engines. He let his hand fall and kept walking. He got home at 6:53 in the morning. The drive back was the kind of drive where you arrive without remembering all of it, the highway miles passing in a blur of headlights and road noise, while your mind is somewhere else entirely. Owen remembered pulling out of the Hargrove lot. He remembered the rain had finally stopped, leaving everything dark and wet and reflecting. He didn't remember much between that and pulling into his driveway, which was a short concrete strip in front of a rented house in a neighborhood that was neither bad nor good, just ordinary in the specific way of places where people lived because it was what they could afford and not because they'd chosen it. He sat in the truck for a moment with the engine off. The house was dark except for the small lamp in the front room that he always left on when he worked nights, a habit he'd developed after coming home once to a completely dark house and experiencing the particular quality of wrong that total darkness had when you expected light. He sat there and looked at that lamp for a moment, and then he got out and went inside. His mother-in-law, Carol, was asleep on the pull-out couch in the spare room. She drove 40 minutes from Concord 2 nights a week to stay over when Owen worked. It had been her idea, not his, though he hadn't argued hard against it. She was a solid, practical woman who had handled the loss of her daughter with a kind of stubborn, forward momentum that Owen recognized and respected, even when it occasionally manifested as her rearranging his kitchen while he was at work. He checked on Lily. She'd migrated during the night. She'd started in the center of the bed and ended up against the wall with her blanket twisted around her legs and one arm hanging off the edge. He straightened the blanket and put her arm back on the bed. She didn't wake up. He stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at her and felt the specific weight that came from looking at her, which was something he couldn't describe precisely and didn't try to. He set an alarm for 9, took off his boots at the bedroom door, and was asleep in under 4 minutes. The alarm felt like it came immediately. He lay still for a moment with his eyes open, looking at the ceiling, running through where he was and what day it was and what he'd agreed to. 10 o'clock. Sienna Ashford, Hargrove Hangar. He had time. He could hear Carol in the kitchen, the specific sounds of Carol's morning routine, which involved the coffee maker and the radio and the particular shuffle of someone who moved through a kitchen like she owned it. He lay there for another 30 seconds, then got up. He showered. He checked his phone and found 17 missed messages. Marcus, 2 numbers he didn't recognize, and a string of notifications from news apps he'd downloaded and never used, all of which seemed to be about the GX9 story, which had apparently made its way into the press overnight in a form that included his name. He put the phone face down and went to make breakfast. Carol was at the stove when he walked into the kitchen, turning eggs with the focused attention she gave everything. She looked at him over her shoulder. She was 61 and wore her gray hair short and had eyes that were the same color as her daughter's had been, which was something Owen had noticed on the first day he met her and still noticed now, 3 years after he didn't have to. "I saw the news," Carol said. "Yeah," Owen said. He poured coffee. $7 million, she said. Not like a question. "That's what she said." Carol turned back to the eggs. She had the quality of a person choosing carefully what to say next. "Owen, $7 million. "I know what $7 million is, Carol." "Do you?" She plated the eggs and set them on the table with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a woman who had been feeding people for 40 years. "Because you look like someone told you your car needed new tires, not like someone who just earned $7 million. Owen sat down and looked at the eggs. They were good eggs. Carol made good eggs. "It's more complicated than the money," he said. She sat across from him with her own coffee. "Tell me." He told her the short version. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things he'd come to appreciate about her. She could actually listen, without loading her response while you were still talking. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "So the aircraft had a defect built into it," she said. "Potentially 13 more aircraft have the same defect. And you're the one who found it." "Yes." She drank her coffee, looked out the kitchen window at the wet morning. "And now you're going back there?" "At 10. Because I need to make sure it gets handled right," he said. He heard how it sounded. A temp mechanic 11 weeks into a contract, making sure a billion-dollar company handled a regulatory crisis right. He understood the absurdity of it. Carol was looking at him. "You know you could just take the money," she said. "You found the fault. You reported it. That's already more than most people would have done." "Yeah," he said, "but you're not going to do that." "No," he said. She nodded. Slowly, the way people nodded when they'd already known the answer before they asked. "You're like your father-in-law was," she said. "He was the same way. Could not let a thing be unless it was done properly." She paused. "It drove me crazy for 37 years. Owen almost smiled. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said. "It's why I married him." She stood up, picked up her coffee cup. "I'll get Lily up. You eat." He ate.
Who is he?
Lily came down at 7:40 in her school clothes, which she'd put on correctly but with her shirt inside out, which was about a 50-50 proposition on any given morning. She was 7 years old and had her mother's eyes and Owen's tendency toward silence, and she ate her breakfast with the serious focus of a person conducting important work. "Dad," she said, halfway through her toast. "Yeah, Bug." "Mrs. Adiemi says we're doing a project about jobs." "What kind of project?" "About what people's parents do for jobs. I have to bring something in." She looked at him. What do you do exactly? Owen thought about how to answer that to a 7-year-old. I fix airplanes, he said. Lily considered this. Like, when they're broken? Yeah, when they're broken. She thought about it for another moment. That seems important, she said, and went back to her toast. Owen looked at the side of her face. The morning light was coming through the kitchen window and landing on her in a way that made him want to hold on to it, which was something he felt regularly and couldn't do anything about. Yeah, he said, I think it is. He got her to school at 8:12, 3 minutes inside the drop-off window. She went in without looking back, which was normal, and also slightly terrible, which was also normal. He sat in the drop-off line for a moment after she disappeared through the door and then pulled out and drove back toward the hangar. The Hargrove facility in daylight looked different than it did at night, more exposed. The parking lot had a dozen more cars than it usually did at this hour, and there were 2 vehicles with television satellite equipment parked on the service road outside the main entrance, which had not been there before. Owen parked in his usual spot in the service lot, badged through the side entrance, and was halfway to the main bay when a man he didn't recognize stepped into his path. Mid-40s. Good suit. A specific kind of artificially relaxed posture that meant the opposite of relaxed. Mr. Callahan, the man said, I'm Gary Purcell from Ashford Aerospace's corporate communications office. Do you have a moment? Owen looked at him. I have a meeting at 10. This will only take a minute. Purcell fell into step beside him without being invited. We're getting a lot of media inquiries this morning about last night, the GX9 story. Your role in it. He paused. We'd appreciate it if you could direct any media requests through our office rather than speaking independently, just to make sure the story gets told accurately. Owen stopped walking. I haven't talked to any media. We know, and we really appreciate that. Purcell had the specific professional warmth of someone trained to deploy it. We just want to make sure we're all working from the same page going forward. There are some sensitivities around the technical details. Are there? Owen said. It wasn't a question. And we want to make sure nothing gets out ahead of the regulatory process that might... Mr. Purcell, Owen said, is this coming from Ms. Ashford or from someone else in the organization? A small pause. I coordinate with multiple stakeholders. That's not what I asked, Owen said. Another pause, slightly longer. My office works across divisions. Owen looked at him for a moment. Okay, he said. I'll keep that in mind. He started walking again. Purcell didn't follow, which Owen took to mean the conversation was over. He thought about the word sensitivities. He thought about who, specifically, in the Ashford Aerospace organizational structure might be particularly sensitive this morning about what details were circulating and in what form. He thought about Dale Renner and the 2 blocked access attempts on the R4C documentation folder at 4 in the morning. He found Sienna Ashford in the same conference room as the night before. She was not alone. Daniel Reyes was there again, and Nina Park, and 2 people Owen hadn't seen before. A woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the particular authority of someone who was accustomed to running things, and a younger man with a notepad who might have been an attorney or might have been an assistant. Mr. Callahan, Sienna said. Sit down. She looked at him. You slept. 3 hours, he said. More than me, she said without self-pity. This is Margaret Cho. She chairs our board's safety committee. And this is James, Nina's associate. Owen nodded. He sat down. Before we start, Sienna said, I want you to know that the FAA notification has been filed. A formal airworthiness concern is on record as of 6:15 this morning. The agency will be sending an inspector to the facility tomorrow, and we've already reached out to the clients who took delivery of the other 12 aircraft. How did they respond? Owen asked. Sienna looked at the table for a moment. Most of them are grounding voluntarily pending inspection. 2 of them are waiting for their own counsel to advise. 1 is threatening to sue. She said it matter-of-factly. That's expected. What about the aircraft in your own fleet? Already grounded, both of them. She looked at him directly. Owen? I want to call you Owen. I want to tell you what we've found since this morning, and then I have some things to ask you. He noticed she'd dropped the formality. He wasn't sure what to make of that. All right, he said. Reyes opened his laptop. Our IT security team completed a full audit of the R4C documentation trail this morning. We found... He stopped, looked at his screen, then looked at Owen. We found that the original revision request for R4C was generated internally by the assembly floor supervisor, flagging a production difficulty with the tolerance specification. Standard procedure. The request went up the chain for engineering review. He paused. Our engineering review team recommended against the revision. Their assessment was that the original tolerance was structurally necessary and that the difficulty on the assembly floor should be resolved through additional technician training, not specification change. But the revision happened anyway, Owen said. The revision happened anyway, Reyes confirmed. The engineering review recommendation was overridden by a VP-level authorization. The authorization was logged under Dale Renner's credentials, and the system timestamp indicates it was processed within 8 minutes of the engineering team's counter-recommendation. The room was quiet for a moment. 8 minutes, Margaret Cho said. She had a low, measured voice. He didn't read it. The engineering memo is 4 pages long, Reyes said, including the technical appendix. Owen looked at the table. He was thinking about that. 8 minutes. Someone with the authority to override an engineering team's safety recommendation had done so in less time than it took to read the document. That was either extraordinary carelessness or something worse than carelessness. And Owen had learned over 14 years in aviation that the two were not always easy to distinguish, and that the distinction, in terms of consequences, often didn't matter. Has Renner been contacted? Owen asked. He hasn't come in today, Sienna said. His assistant says he called in and said he had a personal matter. His phone is going to voicemail. She said it without obvious emotion. Our legal team is advising against direct contact until we have more of the documentation picture in place. Owen nodded. He thought about the suit Renner had been wearing at 2 a.m, the phone call that had sent him out the door, the blocked access attempts an hour later. He thought about how long a person could carry something like this. The knowledge of a specification change, a shortcut, a number adjusted in a document to make a problem disappear, and go to work every morning and attend meetings and sign paperwork and not think about what was sitting underneath those 14 aircraft. He didn't know the answer to that. He didn't know Renner. He knew what the document showed, and he knew what the aircraft had done when the bracket was at the wrong position, and he knew what it would eventually do at altitude when the accumulated stress of actual flight loaded the wrong variables into the wrong systems. I want to ask you something, Margaret Cho said. She was looking at Owen with the direct attention of someone who was professionally skeptical and didn't mind you knowing it. Last night, when you heard the port engine and came to the conclusion you came to, walk me through it. Owen looked at her. The acoustic signature, he said. When a component isn't seated correctly in an assembly, it changes the resonance characteristics of the surrounding structure. The change is very small. Most diagnostic systems aren't designed to detect it because they're measuring electrical and mechanical outputs, not acoustic signatures. He paused. I've spent a lot of years in hangars. You learn to listen. You diagnosed a complex multi-system fault by listening, Cho said. Not dismissively. Testing. I suspected a fault by listening, Owen said. I diagnosed it by looking at the component directly and comparing it against the original specification. The listening told me where to look. The specification told me what I was looking at. Cho looked at him for a long moment. And then you saw the revision. Yes. And you understood immediately what it implied. I understood what it might imply. I said that to Ms. Ashford last night. I was careful about that. You were, Sienna said, quietly. Cho leaned back in her chair. She took her reading glasses off her head and turned them in her hands. Mr. Callahan, I've been on aviation safety committees for 19 years. I've seen manufacturing issues, maintenance failures, design oversights. What I haven't often seen, what I've almost never seen, is someone who noticed the problem, fixed the immediate fault, and then voluntarily flagged the deeper issue at cost to themselves. She paused. Most people in your position would have taken the prize and gone home. I have a daughter, Owen said. He said it simply. She's going to fly on aircraft someday. Everybody's daughter is going to fly on aircraft someday. The room was quiet again. Not awkwardly quiet, the kind of quiet that meant something had been said that didn't need to be added to. Reyes cleared his throat. There's one more thing, he said. He looked at Sienna, then at Owen. The documentation audit also found something in the incoming inspection records for this aircraft, the GX-9 that came into Hargrove 17 days ago. Owen waited. The incoming inspection. The standard delivery check that should be performed when a new aircraft enters service was logged as complete. Sign-off dated, inspector credentialed, all boxes checked. Reyes turned his laptop toward Owen. The inspector listed on the document works for the Delivery Coordination Division, Renner's department. The inspection was logged as taking 47 minutes. Owen looked at the document. He looked at the timestamp. Then he looked up. A GX9 delivery inspection takes a minimum of 4 hours, he said. 6 if you're doing it properly. Yes, Reyes said. The inspection wasn't done, Owen said. We believe the inspection documentation was filed without the inspection being performed, Nina Park said from the other end of the table, which means the delivery acceptance paperwork for a brand new $42 million aircraft was fraudulent. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Owen sat back. He was thinking about the shape of it now. The whole thing, not just the piece he'd stumbled into the night before. A production line under schedule pressure, a tolerance specification inconvenient to hit, a VP who had the authority to change the number and the motivation to keep the line moving, and who had changed it so fast he couldn't have read the engineering objection. And then, at delivery, an inspection that existed only on paper, performed by someone from the same VP's department, signed off and filed and forgotten. And then the aircraft had sat dead in the hangar for 6 days because a bracket was 4 times outside its original specification, and 12 aircraft with the same issue had flown away to clients, and nobody had known. Until now. What happens next? Owen asked. He was asking Sienna specifically. She looked at him steadily. The FAA inspector arrives tomorrow. We'll cooperate completely. The documentation package we're assembling, the original specification, the R4C revision trail, the engineering override, the inspection records, all of it goes to the agency in full. She paused. It will also go to our board. There will be an emergency meeting, and based on what the board finds, there will likely be consequences for individuals responsible. And production? Halted, she said. As of this morning, GX9 production is suspended pending a full safety audit of the assembly process and tolerance specifications. She said it without flinching. That's probably $40 million in delayed revenue. Minimum. Owen nodded. He understood what that cost, and he understood that she was telling him she was going to pay it. There's something else I want to talk to you about, Sienna said. Her voice shifted slightly. Not softer exactly, but less formal, like she was setting down a tool she'd been carrying. Something separate from the investigation. He looked at her. All right. Last night you solved a problem in 4 minutes that 11 credentialed engineers couldn't solve in 6 days, she said. Not because you have better equipment or more education, because you know how to listen to a machine, and you know what you're hearing when you hear it, and you understood what a document revision meant in about 15 seconds when nobody else was looking at it. She paused. I've been running this company for 7 years. I've hired a lot of people. And I want to ask you something honestly, and I want you to answer it honestly. Okay, Owen said. What are you doing in a temporary maintenance contract at Hargrove? He looked at her. It was a direct question, the same kind she'd asked in the hangar the night before. Working, he said. That's not what I mean. I know what you mean, he said. I'm doing it because it pays what it pays and the hours work for my situation. He looked at the table. When Rachel died, I had Lily, and I had the bills, and I had about 6 months of savings. I couldn't take the assignments that paid well because those required travel, and I couldn't travel. So I took what I could get that kept me in Charlotte. He paused. This is what I could get. How long have you been doing just what you can get? She asked. It wasn't unkind. He thought about it. 3 years. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I want to make you an offer. Not today. Today is not the right day for that conversation. There's too much happening, but I want you to know it's coming, so you have time to think about it. She looked at him steadily. I want to ask you to consider a different kind of work. Owen looked at her. He'd been in rooms like this before. Not this kind of room, not this level of company, but rooms where someone with authority offered something that sounded significant. He'd learned to be careful in those moments, because significant offers and good offers were not always the same thing. I'll think about it, he said. She nodded. That's all I'm asking. The meeting broke up in stages. Margaret Cho left first with the compact efficiency of someone with 17 other things on her schedule. Nina Park and James gathered their materials. Reyes closed his laptop and gave Owen a brief, genuine nod that meant something, though Owen couldn't have said exactly what. He was pulling on his jacket when Sienna spoke again from behind him. Owen. He turned. The prize, she said. The $7 million. Before we finalize the paperwork, is there anything you want to tell me about how you'd like to handle it? He looked at her. He'd been thinking about this since about 4 in the morning, in the moments between the maintenance logs and the cold coffee and the drive home through the wet dark. He'd turned it over with the same methodical attention he gave to most things, and he'd arrived at the same place every time. Not yet, he said. Let's get through the next week first. Let's see the inspection done properly and the documentation filed and the board meeting handled. Then I'll tell you what I want to do with it. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. There was something in it that might have been respect, or might have been surprise trying to look like respect, or might have been something else entirely. All right, she said, 1 week. He left the conference room and walked back through the hangar. The GX-9 was still in the center bay, silent now, the work lights turned off, and the portable equipment cleared away. In the flat daylight coming through the high windows, it looked different than it had at night. Less dramatic, more like a machine. Which was what it was. A very expensive machine that had almost become a very expensive disaster. He stopped for a moment and looked at it. He thought about 14 aircraft. He thought about the 13 others with their brackets and their tolerances and their accumulated flight hours still to come. He thought about the inspection that had been signed and filed without being done, and the engineering recommendation that had been overridden in 8 minutes, and the document revision that had changed one number and created a chain of consequences that had ended with a night shift mechanic standing in a brightly lit hangar at 3 in the morning hearing something nobody else had thought to listen for. He thought about the fact that he'd almost not stopped. He'd been walking to the break room to get coffee. He'd been tired and he'd been thinking about Lily, and he'd almost just walked past. He stood there for a moment with that thought. Then he went and finished his shift. The next 3 days moved, the way that days moved when a large institution was in controlled crisis, simultaneously fast and slow, with too much happening in too many places to track any one thread completely. The FAA inspector arrived as scheduled and spent 2 full days at the facility, working through the documentation that Reyes and the legal team had assembled with a methodical thoroughness that Owen found genuinely reassuring. Owen was interviewed twice, once on the first day, for about 2 hours, by an investigator named Holtz, who had the patient, unhurried manner of someone who had done this for a long time, and once on the second day by a second investigator who covered mostly the same ground from slightly different angles. He told both of them exactly what he'd done and exactly what he'd seen, in the same precise language he'd used with Reyes and Nina Park. He showed them his maintenance logs. He showed them the timestamp records. Holtz had reviewed the hangar security footage and asked Owen to walk him through the repair in real time against the recording, which they did for 40 minutes, stopping and starting at specific moments. At the end of the second interview, Holtz closed his notebook and said, "Mr. Callahan, your documentation is about as clean as I've seen in 22 years of accident investigations." "It's not an accident investigation," Owen said. "Not yet," Holtz said. "Which is the point." He picked up his notebook. "That documentation you kept, the logs, the procedure record, the fact that you made sure you were in camera frame the entire time, that's what makes this case clean. That's what prevents people from muddying the water later." He paused. "Did you know that's what it would do?" Owen thought about it honestly. "I suspected someone might try to say I caused the problem instead of fixed it," he said. "It seemed like the kind of thing that could happen." Holtz looked at him for a moment. "It is," he said. "And it was about to." Owen absorbed that. "When?" "There were communications, emails, internal memos, prepared in the 24 hours after the GX-9 story broke. We've obtained them as part of the documentation review." Holtz was careful. "I'm not going to tell you their content because that's part of an active investigation, but I will tell you that your documentation made those communications effectively useless." Owen sat with that for a moment. He thought about the night in the hangar, the tiredness, the cold coffee, the almost not stopping. He thought about the specific instinct that had made him log every step before he started, that had made him position himself in the camera frame, that had made him ask for witnesses. He hadn't been certain something was wrong that night. He'd been suspicious, which wasn't the same thing, but he'd been careful anyway, The way he was always careful, the way 14 years of working on machines that people trusted their lives to had made him careful. Because in aviation, the cost of not being careful was not inconvenience. It was catastrophe. "Thank you for telling me that," Owen said. Holtz nodded. "Thank you for the documentation," he said. Well, on the fourth day after the repair, Owen was sitting at the workstation in the secondary bay, finishing a routine maintenance log on a Hawker 800 that had come in for a scheduled inspection, when Marcus appeared in the bay doorway with an expression that combined excitement with the deliberate effort to appear calm. "Board meeting," Marcus said. "Today. Called this morning. Emergency session." He came into the bay and lowered his voice out of habit, even though they were alone. "Renner's been suspended pending investigation. It was in an internal communication that someone from legal sent to all department heads about an hour ago." Owen looked at his maintenance log. He made the final entry, reviewed it, and saved it. "Okay," he said. "Owen, the man has been here since the beginning. He's been VP of manufacturing for 5 years." "I know. Does that—" Marcus paused, searching for the right word. "Does that feel like anything to you?" Owen thought about it. He tried to give it an honest answer, because Marcus deserved an honest answer, and because it was a real question. "It feels necessary," he said finally. "I don't feel good about it, and I don't feel bad about it. It just feels like what has to happen when someone makes the choices he made." Marcus nodded slowly. He had the look of a person digesting something that didn't go down easily. "There are people here who've known him for years," he said. "Some of them are pretty upset." "That makes sense," Owen said. "It doesn't change what the documents show." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "I guess it doesn't." Owen's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Sienna Ashford's personal number. He'd had it since the morning after the repair, when she'd texted him the meeting time and told him to use that number directly. The text said, "Board meeting at 2 p.m. I'd like you to be there." He looked at the text for a moment. Then he typed back, "I'll be there." He put the phone in his pocket and looked at the Hawker 800. He had about 4 hours. He went back to work. He was thinking about Lily, who would be in school right now, probably working on the project about parents' jobs. He thought about what she would bring in. He thought about what she understood about what he did, which was probably something like fixes airplanes when they're broken, which was accurate as far as it went. He thought about the fact that 3 days ago, an aircraft with a hidden fault had been cleared for service, and that the people who would eventually board it would never know how close the margin had been, and that this was mostly how it worked. Most of the time, the narrow escapes happened quietly, and nobody built a story around them because the disaster never arrived. Because somewhere along the line, someone paid attention, and the disaster got stopped before it became a disaster, most of the time. He finished the Hawker 800 log. He checked his tools. He straightened up his workstation in the methodical way he always did, putting everything back in its place before he left, because that was how you worked in a hangar if you were going to work in one at all. At 5 minutes before 2, he walked into the Hargrove facility's main conference room, which was larger than the glass-walled room they'd been using and had 12 seats around a table and a wall of monitors, and enough people in it to make the air feel slightly compressed. He sat in the chair that Sienna Ashford pointed him to at the far end of the table. The board meeting started. And everything that had been building since 3 o'clock in the morning 4 nights ago, since the moment he'd slowed his walk and stopped in the middle of the hangar and listened to an engine that didn't sound quite right, everything that had accumulated in the hours and days since, the documents, the interviews, the audit trail, the grounded aircraft, the suspended executive, the FAA notifications and the legal filings, and the $40 million in halted production, all of it came to a point in that room. Owen sat at the end of the table and answered questions when he was asked questions and was quiet when he wasn't, and he listened to the proceedings with the same careful attention he gave to everything. And when the board voted at the end of 2 hours, he understood what the vote meant. It meant the thing was going to be handled properly. It meant the 14 aircraft were going to be inspected, genuinely inspected, with the care and precision the original specification had called for. Procedures that had been shortcut for the sake of a schedule were going to be rebuilt from the ground up. It meant someone was going to be held accountable, not because accountability was satisfying, it wasn't particularly, but because accountability was what happened when you decided that the correct tolerance mattered more than the convenient one. He drove home in the late afternoon light. The rain from 4 nights ago was long gone, and the sky was the specific clear blue that October produced in Charlotte when it was trying to remind you summer wasn't always coming back. He picked Lily up from after-school care. She climbed into the truck with her backpack and her lunchbox and a piece of paper she immediately held up for him to look at. It was a drawing, crayon, the somewhat abstract representational style of a 7-year-old, of what appeared to be a large airplane and a small figure with brown hair standing beside it. "For my project," she said. "It's you, fixing an airplane." Owen looked at the drawing. The airplane was purple, which actual airplanes were not, and the figure had enormous hands, which was probably easier to draw than normal-sized hands. It was, he thought, a fairly accurate representation of the general situation. "That's really good, Bug," he said. She took the paper back and studied it critically. "His hands are too big," she said. "A little bit," he agreed. She put it carefully into her backpack. "Mrs. Adeyemi said to ask if you could come talk to the class about your job," she said. "On Friday, if you're not busy." Owen thought about Friday. He thought about his schedule, which was a maintenance of the GX9 documentation follow-up in the morning and nothing in the afternoon. "I can do Friday," he said. "Okay." She settled back in her seat with the contentment of a task completed. "Can we have pasta tonight?" "Sure," he said. "We can have pasta." He pulled out of the parking lot and drove home through the October light, and Lily talked about her day in the fragmentary, wandering way of children, and Owen listened and responded and asked the right questions in the right places, and the truck moved through the streets of an ordinary neighborhood in an ordinary city, and there was nothing remarkable about it at all. Which was, Owen thought, exactly as it should be. The pasta was penne with jarred marinara sauce, because Owen was a competent cook in the way that single fathers became competent cooks, reliably, without artistry, driven by the practical need to put something warm on the table before 8 o'clock. Lily ate 2 bowls and talked about a disagreement she'd had at recess with a girl named Sophie, the details of which were complicated in the way that 7-year-old social dynamics were always complicated. And Owen listened and made the appropriate sounds and refilled her water glass and thought, in the background, about the board meeting. He'd sat through 2 hours of it. He'd answered questions from 7 board members, some of whom were clearly technically knowledgeable and some of whom were clearly not, but were trying hard not to show it. He'd walked through the acoustic observation, the bracket position, the R4C revision, the engineering override, the fraudulent inspection documentation. He'd been precise, and he'd been direct, and he'd answered follow-up questions without impatience, even when some of the follow-up questions covered ground he'd already covered. The vote, at the end, had been unanimous. Production halt, full safety audit, executive review, meaning Renner, and potentially others in his department who'd been involved in the inspection filing. The FAA investigation was already running parallel, and the board's actions would feed into that process rather than replace it. What the board had not yet done was deal with the attempted document access. That part of the meeting had gone into what Nina Park called a closed session, meaning Owen and the non-board attendees had stepped out. And when Sienna emerged 40 minutes later, she had the specific controlled expression that meant a significant decision had been made and she wasn't ready to discuss it. She'd looked at Owen across the corridor. "Thank you for being here," she'd said. "I'll be in touch in the next few days." He'd nodded and left. He'd picked up Lily. He'd made pasta. Now Lily was done with dinner and telling him about a book she was reading, something about a girl who could talk to horses. And he was washing the dishes and saying, "Really? And what happened next?" in the right places. And it was an ordinary evening in an ordinary kitchen, and there was something almost surreal about how ordinary it was given what the week had been. "Dad?" Lily said from the table. "Yeah." "Are you listening?" He turned around. She was looking at him with the particular expression she had when she'd identified a gap in his attention, which was an expression he suspected she had inherited from Rachel, who had been exceptionally accurate at the same thing. "I am," he said. The horse talked back to her. Lily looked slightly surprised. "Yeah," she said. "That's the good part." "Tell me more," he said, and went back to the dishes. And this time he actually listened. On Friday he went to Lily's school. He sat in a small chair in the front of a second-grade classroom that smelled like construction paper and something that might have been glue, facing 22 7-year-olds who were at the particular age where they looked at adults with either complete trust or complete skepticism, and frequently both at once. Mrs. Adeyemi, a brisk and warm woman in her late 30s, had set up a small display area where parents could bring objects related to their jobs. The parent before Owen had been a veterinarian who'd brought a stethoscope and a foam model of a dog skeleton, which was a tough act to follow. Owen had brought his tool bag. He'd also brought, on impulse, a small section of aviation cable, the kind used in control systems, and a sample of the safety wire that mechanics use to lock critical fasteners in place. Not dramatic, but real. He'd talked to second graders before, sort of. He'd helped at Lily's class once when Rachel was still alive, when Lily was 4 and in pre-K, and he remembered it as being simultaneously easier and harder than adult conversations. Easier because children didn't perform attention, harder because they'd tell you directly when you'd lost it. He told them he fixed airplanes for a living. He showed them the cable and explained that it was part of how a pilot moved the control surfaces, the wings, the tail, and that a mechanic's job was to make sure the cable was in perfect condition, because if it wasn't, the pilot couldn't steer. He showed them the safety wire and explained that it was a way of making absolutely sure a bolt couldn't come loose even under vibration, even at 30,000 feet. A boy in the second row raised his hand. "What happens if you forget to put the wire on?" "The bolt can come loose," Owen said. "And then what?" "Depends on the bolt," Owen said. "Sometimes nothing. Sometimes something very serious." The boy processed this. "Have you ever forgotten?" "No," Owen said. "I've never forgotten." He paused. "But I checked twice anyway." "Why?" the boy said. "If you never forget?" Owen looked at him. He was a small kid with a serious face and a gap between his front teeth. "Because the fact that I've never forgotten before doesn't mean I can't forget," Owen said. "So I checked twice." The kid nodded slowly, like this was information he would file away. After the class, Mrs. Adeyemi shook his hand and said that was one of the better explanations of professional responsibility she'd heard at one of these things. And Lily walked him to the parking lot with the specific pride of a child whose parent had done adequately in a public situation. "You did good," she told him seriously. "Yeah?" he said. "The wire was interesting," she said. "Some of them hadn't heard of safety wire." "Most adults haven't either," he said. She considered this. "That seems bad," she said. "It's fine," he said, "as long as the mechanics know." She thought about it for another moment, and then seemed to decide she'd resolved the issue and moved on to asking about after-school pickup, which was back to normal now that Carol had returned to Concord. Owen told her 3:30, same as usual, and watched her go back inside and then drove back to the facility. The call from Sienna came that same Friday afternoon, while Owen was in the secondary bay writing up the hawker inspection he'd been working on between everything else. His phone showed her number and he picked up. "Are you at Hargrove?" she asked. "Yes." "Can you come to the main conference room? There are some people I need you to meet." The people turned out to be 3. A man named Foster from the FAA's Aviation Safety Division, a woman named Dr. Kessler, who was a structural engineer the FAA had brought in as a technical consultant, and a second Ashford board member named Paul Whitman, who Owen hadn't seen at the earlier meeting and who wore the specific expression of a person who had read every document in the package and was still working through what he thought about it. Sienna made the introductions, and then Foster said, "Mr. Callahan, we want to go through the technical specifics of what you found one more time, with Dr. Kessler present." Owen went through it again. He'd told the story enough times now that he could do it without thinking, which meant he could pay attention to the people listening to it, which was more useful. Dr. Kessler asked the most precise questions. She wanted the exact measurement he'd taken on the bracket position, which he gave her from the notes he'd logged during the repair, and she wanted his assessment of why the acoustic signature he'd detected was specific to this misalignment rather than some other fault, which he answered carefully, distinguishing between what he knew and what he'd inferred. She was the kind of person who noticed that distinction and appreciated it. At the end, Foster looked up from his notes. "Mr. Callahan, I want to be direct with you about where we are. The documentation your preliminary inspection uncovered has opened an investigation that is now significantly larger than a single aircraft fault. We're looking at manufacturing practices, documentation integrity, and acceptance inspection procedures across the entire GX9 production program." Owen nodded. "Your maintenance logs and the hangar security footage have been incorporated into the evidentiary record," Foster said. "They're important to us, And I wanted you to know that. I appreciate you telling me, Owen said. We're also going to need you to be available for additional interviews over the next several weeks, Foster said. Is that something you can accommodate? Yes, Owen said. Foster nodded and made a note. Whitman, the board member, spoke for the first time. He had a measured, deliberate voice, like someone who had learned to take his time before speaking. Mr. Callahan, I've read the documentation from the night of the repair, including the section where you describe requesting your maintenance procedure be witnessed and ensuring you were within camera coverage before making any contact with the aircraft. He paused. I've been on this board for 6 years and I've reviewed a lot of incident reports. That level of procedural self-documentation by a contract maintenance worker acting independently at 3 in the morning is unusual. Owen looked at him. I thought someone might try to say I caused the problem, he said. I wanted to make sure that was demonstrably false before I started. Whitman looked at him for a moment longer than was entirely comfortable. You were right to think that, he said. There was something in his voice that wasn't quite an apology, but was in the general neighborhood of one. Owen understood what Whitman was telling him. He filed it away. After Foster and Kessler left, Sienna asked Whitman for a few minutes, and the board member excused himself with the brief nod of someone who understood exactly what was about to be discussed and had already formed his opinion of it. Sienna sat down at the table. She looked like she'd slept less than usual, which was saying something. I want to talk to you about what I mentioned before, she said. The offer. All right, Owen said. I want to be clear about something first, she said. What I'm going to propose has nothing to do with the prize money. Those are two separate things, and I don't want you to think I'm conflating them. She looked at him steadily. The $7 million is yours, full stop, whatever you decide to do with it. Okay, he said. What I want to talk about is a role, she said. A permanent position within the company, not in the Hargrove maintenance operation, within Ashford Aerospace itself. She paused. Head of Aircraft Safety and Reliability. That's the title I'm proposing. The role would involve overseeing safety protocol compliance across our entire fleet, assembly, maintenance, delivery inspection, post-delivery follow-up. You'd have authority to flag non-compliant processes at any level of the organization, including VP level. Owen looked at the table for a moment. I'm a mechanic, he said. You're a mechanic who diagnosed a multi-system fault by listening, she said, and then spent 48 hours making sure it was handled correctly at every level. That's not a mechanic, that's a safety culture. He looked at her. I don't have a management background. I'm not looking for management, she said. I'm looking for someone who will walk through my assembly facilities and actually know what he's looking at. Someone my engineers can't bluff, because he's done the work himself. She paused. Someone who, when he sees a tolerance specification that doesn't look right, will ask why, and keep asking until he has an answer that satisfies him. Owen was quiet for a moment. He was thinking about it seriously, not performing consideration. He thought about what the role would mean practically, the hours, the travel, the distance from his current work. He thought about Lily and the school schedule and the fact that Carol drove 40 minutes twice a week because the hours he worked were the hours he had to work. What does the schedule look like? He asked. Standard business hours, primarily, she said. Some travel, site visits to our assembly facility in Raleigh, occasionally to client locations. But we're talking 4, maybe 5 days of travel per month, not weeks. He thought about that. 4 days a month was manageable. 4 days a month he could work around with Carol and the school schedule and the particular logistical architecture he'd built to keep Lily's life as stable as he could make it. What about salary? He said. It was a direct question, and he asked it directly, because he'd learned that not asking direct questions about money was a way of letting other people decide what you were worth. She named a number. It was more than 3 times what he currently made at Hargrove. He kept his face still. And the starting date? He asked. That's negotiable, she said. I don't want to create instability for you with your current contract. We can work around your Hargrove timeline. Owen looked at the table. He thought about the 14 aircraft. He thought about the assembly facility in Raleigh, where 800 people built GX-9s under process specifications that had just been revealed to be compromised at the oversight level. He thought about what it meant to have someone in a safety role who had actually installed brackets and read acoustic signatures, and understood what a running change specification revision looked like from the inside. He thought about Rachel, who would have looked at this situation with her precise, practical intelligence and said something like, "Owen, what are you waiting for?" He thought about the fact that he was 32 years old and had been doing just what he could get for 3 years. "I want to tell you what I want to do with the prize money before I answer," he said. Sienna looked at him. "All right." "I don't want to keep it," he said. "I want it to go into a training program. For mechanics. Specifically the ones who fall through the cracks. Veterans coming out of military aviation who can't get placed because they don't have civilian credentials. Single parents who have the experience but not the flexibility for full-time training programs. People who know how to do the work but need a structured pathway to make it legible to the industry." He paused. "A program that recognizes practical knowledge, not just credentials. That gives people the certification pathway they need without requiring them to quit their jobs and their lives to do it." Sienna was very still. She was looking at him with the focused attention she'd given him since the first night, but there was something different in it now. "You've thought about this for a while," she said. It wasn't a question. "I've been one of those people," he said, "for 3 years. I know what it costs." She was quiet for a moment. $7 million isn't enough to run a program like that long term, she said. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm telling you about it. Not asking you to write a check. Asking you to think about what a company in your position could build if it decided this was something worth building." The room was quiet. Outside the conference room, the hangar had its normal afternoon activity. Voices, equipment sounds, the specific background noise of a facility running on a modified schedule because a production halt had freed up personnel for facility work. "The program would also serve Ashford Aerospace," Sienna said slowly. She was thinking out loud. He could tell by the cadence. "We have a technician shortage. The whole industry does. If we built a pipeline—" "That's not why I'm suggesting it," Owen said. "I know," she said, "but it's also true." She looked at him. "And it makes it sustainable, not charity. A real program with real outcomes that the company benefits from alongside the participants." Owen nodded. That was the logic he'd arrived at on his own, but it was worth hearing her arrive at it independently. "All right," she said. "I'll take both to the board. The program and the role." She looked at him. "I already know what I think the answer will be." "What do you think?" he said. "I think the board voted unanimously on the safety halt after 2 hours with you in the room," she said. "I think they'll vote yes on anything I put in front of them that has your name attached to it right now." Owen wasn't sure how he felt about that. He didn't say so. "I still want to answer your question," he said, "about the role." "I know," she said. "Take the time you need." He took 4 days. He talked to Carol, who sat at his kitchen table with her coffee, and listened to the whole thing and said, at the end, "Owen, I need you to hear me say something." "Okay," he said. "You have spent 3 years making yourself smaller because you thought that was what Lily needed," Carol said. "Small schedule, small job, small life. And I understand why you did it, and I'm not saying it was wrong." She looked at him. "But Lily doesn't need you to be small. She needs you to be okay. And you've been less than okay for a long time." Owen looked at his coffee. "I've been fine," he said. "You've been functional," Carol said. "That's different." She put her hand on the table, not on his hand, but near it. Rachel would not have wanted functional. You know that. He did know that. It was the thing he'd been not saying to himself for about a year. He talked to Marcus, who said, "Man, you'd be crazy not to," and then looked immediately worried that he'd been too casual about it and said, "I mean, it's a big decision, take your time," and then said, "But also you'd be crazy not to." He talked to nobody else because those were the right people to talk to, and he'd said what needed saying. On the 4th day, he called Sienna's number. She picked up on the second ring. "Yes," she said, and he could hear from her voice that she was in the middle of something. "I'll take the role," he said. A pause. Not long, maybe 2 seconds, but enough. "Good," she said. She sounded like a person who had been waiting to hear a specific word and had just heard it. "Can you come in Monday to go through the formal terms?" "I can," he said. "Good," she said again. "Monday." And then before she hung up, "Owen, you're going to be good at this." I wasn't sure he agreed with that. He thought he'd be decent at it, and that decent was where you started and good was where you arrived if you were careful. But he said, "Thank you." and hung up and stood in his kitchen for a moment with the phone in his hand. Then Lily came downstairs in her inside-out shirt and said she was hungry, and the moment was over. The board meeting that formally addressed the investigation findings and the personnel decisions took place 12 days after the GX9 repair. Owen was not in the meeting itself. It was a closed board session. But Sienna had asked him to be in the building, and he spent most of the morning in the secondary bay doing routine maintenance work and watching his phone. The meeting ran 4 hours. He heard about the first hour from Whitman, who came to find him around lunchtime and said, in the measured tone of a man delivering information with the serial numbers filed off, that the morning had been productive. He heard about the second hour from Nina Park, who stopped by the conference room where Owen was eating a sandwich and said that certain personnel decisions had been finalized and would be announced through official channels later in the day. He heard about the third and fourth hours from Sienna herself, who appeared in the doorway of the secondary bay at 3:15 with her blazer over her arm and the specific look of a person who had been in a room arguing for a long time and had won but wasn't celebrating. "It's done," she said. Owen set down the wrench he'd been holding. "What's the outcome?" She leaned against the bay doorframe. "Renner is out. Formal termination, effective immediately. 2 members of his department who were directly involved in the inspection documentation, the filing of a completion record for an inspection that wasn't performed, are also out. The FAA's parallel investigation will determine what additional consequences follow from that." She paused. 2 other VP-level individuals who were aware of the R4C revision situation but did not flag it. They're receiving formal censure and are on a 6-month performance review. The board considered termination for them and decided against it. "I disagreed with that decision." "But you're outvoted," Owen said. "I'm outvoted," she said. "I noted my disagreement for the record." She looked around the bay, at the hawker, at Owen's tools, at the ordinary mechanics of a working aviation maintenance facility. The production halt is formalized through the safety audit. The audit timeline is 6 weeks. All 14 GX9 airframes have now been inspected or are in the process of being inspected, and preliminary results on 8 of the completed inspections confirm the bracket positioning issue in 4 of them. Owen absorbed that. 4 out of 8, 50%. He'd hoped the number would be lower. "Thankfully," Sienna said, "all 4 were caught before they could cause an incident." She looked at him. "The FAA investigator, Holtz, told me this morning that given the flight hours logged on some of those aircraft, we were fortunate." "Lucky," Owen said. He said it plainly, because that was what it was. Not inevitable, not the result of some system working correctly. Luck, which was the thing that ran out if you depended on it long enough. "Yes," Sienna said, "lucky." She didn't try to dress it differently. Which is why the audit and the process rebuild are not optional. I told the board that if I have to fight them on every step, I will, and I think they believe me. "Do you think they do?" Owen asked. "Or are they just saying they do because of the heat right now?" She looked at him. It was a pointed question, and he'd asked it pointedly because it was the right question. "I think some of them do, and some of them will need to be reminded," she said. "That's why I need someone in a safety role who isn't dependent on the board's approval to do the job." Owen nodded. He picked up his wrench and set it in the tool bag. "The formal terms meeting is Monday," he said. "Monday," she confirmed. "I'll be there," he said. She pushed off the doorframe. She was halfway out of the bay when Owen said, "Sienna." She stopped and looked back. "Renner," Owen said. "How long have you known him?" She was quiet for a moment. 7 years, she said, since before the company went public. He was one of the first senior people I hired. Owen thought about what that meant. 7 years, the building of something together, the specific trust that came from working alongside someone through the hard early years of a company. He thought about what it meant to discover that trust had been misplaced, not maliciously, but through the accumulation of small decisions, each one rationalized in the moment, each one slightly worse than the one before. "I'm sorry," he said. He meant it. She looked at him for a moment. "He made his choices," she said. "Nobody made them for him." She turned and walked out. Owen stood alone in the bay. He thought about Dale Renner, who had changed a number in a document at some point in the last production cycle, and then continued coming to work and continued signing papers and continued believing, probably, that it was fine, that it would be fine, that the aircraft were fine, that the tolerance revision was within acceptable range, that nothing bad was going to happen. Owen understood the mechanics of that thinking. He'd seen it before, but not at this scale, but in principle. The way people moved past uncomfortable decisions by filing them under done and moving forward. The way a shortcut became history once it was in the past. What Dale Renner had not understood, and what 14 aircraft with misaligned brackets could have demonstrated in the worst possible way, was that the past was never entirely past when it was built into the structure of something that flew. Monday arrived with the specific quality of a morning that was going to be different from the ones before it. Owen woke before the alarm, which he almost never did. He lay in the half-dark for a few minutes, listening to the house sounds, the heat coming on, the particular silence of a child still asleep. 2 rooms over, and thought about the fact that he was about to sign paperwork that would change the shape of his working life in a significant way. He wasn't nervous about it. He was something more cautious than nervous. The feeling of someone stepping onto a structure they just inspected and believed to be sound but had not yet personally put their weight on. He got up. He made breakfast. He got Lily up and dressed, this time catching the inside-out shirt before she got downstairs, which he counted as a small victory. He walked her to the corner where the school bus stopped and waited with her, which he did every morning because the corner was on a curve and he didn't like her standing there alone. The bus came. She climbed on without looking back, the way she always did. He drove to Hargrove. The formal terms meeting was in the main conference room, and it took 2 hours and involved Nina Park and 2 people from Ashford's HR division and a set of documents that Owen read carefully, asked 3 questions about, and then signed. The role was official as of his last day on the Hargrove contract, which was 3 weeks out. During those 3 weeks, he'd begin a transition period, meeting with the safety and quality teams, reviewing the audit process in progress, getting oriented to the Raleigh assembly facility schedule. After the signing, one of the HR people left, and then the other, and then Nina Pack, until it was just Owen and Sienna in the room. "How do you feel?" Sienna asked. "Like I've done something I can't undo," Owen said. She considered that. "Is that bad?" He thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "I've done a lot of things I couldn't undo. It's usually only bad when you do them wrong." She nodded. "I want to talk about the training program," she said. "I've had 3 preliminary conversations with the board since you brought it up. The appetite is there. What I need from you in the next few weeks is something more concrete. A concept document, a proposed structure, what the target population looks like, what the certification pathway would involve." She paused. "I know that's a lot to ask on top of everything else." "It's not a lot to ask," Owen said. "I've been thinking about it for a long time. Most of it's already in my head." "Then let's put it on paper," she said. He left the conference room. He walked through the main bay, past the GX-9, which was still grounded but had been moved to a secondary position to make room for other work. He paused beside it for a moment. It was starting to look like an ordinary aircraft again. Just another expensive machine in a hangar full of expensive machines. The drama of the past 2 weeks receding from it the way weather receded after a storm. He thought about the bracket, the 4 minutes of work, the document revision that had changed one number and set everything in motion. He thought about all the things in aviation, in all kinds of engineering, in all kinds of work, that existed because someone had decided the correct tolerance mattered. The safety wire, the double check. The inspection that took 4 hours because a 47-minute inspection wasn't actually an inspection. He thought about the boy in Lily's class, the gap-toothed kid who'd asked why Owen checked twice when he'd never forgotten. Because the fact that I've never forgotten before doesn't mean I can't forget. He stood there for another moment. Then he picked up his tool bag and went back to work. The day the FAA formally issued its findings was a Thursday, 3.5 weeks after the GX-9 repair. Owen was in Raleigh, sitting in his first official walkthrough of the assembly facility, with a quality manager named Torres, who had the cautious energy of someone not entirely sure what to make of his new colleague, when his phone showed a news notification that the agency had released its preliminary investigation report. He read the headline. He put the phone back in his pocket and kept walking. Torres, who'd also seen something on his phone, looked at Owen sideways. "That's the Ashford report," he said. "Yeah," Owen said. "You're the mechanic," Torres said. Not accusingly, more like he was confirming something he'd suspected. "I'm the head of aircraft safety and reliability," Owen said. "Now, Back then I was a mechanic. Torres looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "What do you want to look at first?" "The tolerance verification station," Owen said, "where they measure the bracket assemblies before sign-off." Torres took him there. The station was a bench with calibrated measuring tools and a computer terminal that logged each measurement against the specification. The technician at the station was a woman in her 30s named Pavlik, who looked up when they approached and then looked more carefully when Torres introduced Owen. "I want to understand your process," Owen told her. "Walk me through exactly what you do, in order, when a bracket assembly comes to this station." She walked him through it. He listened. He asked questions, not trap questions, but real ones about the points in the process where variation was most likely, where the tooling was most sensitive, where a technician who was tired or rushed might introduce an error without knowing it. She answered carefully at first, then more openly as she realized the questions were genuine and not accusatory. She was good at her job. He could tell that from the precision of her answers and the way she'd organized her station. At the end, she said hesitantly, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure," Owen said. "The bracket issue on the Charlotte aircraft," she said. "The one you found." She paused. "We heard it was positioned at the outer edge of the revised spec, which means someone here measured it and it passed." "Yes," Owen said. "Which means someone here made an error," she said, "or the spec was wrong." "The spec was wrong," Owen said. "The revision shouldn't have happened, but also, yes, see, someone here measured it and passed it, which means the measurement or the logging had an issue too." He looked at her. "That's not about blame. It's about finding the gap. The spec error and the measurement gap both need to be fixed, because if only one of them gets fixed, you've still got half a problem." She looked at him for a moment. "Okay," she said. It was a small word, but it meant something. The particular okay of someone who had been waiting to hear a thing said plainly and had just heard it. He spent the rest of the day in Raleigh. He drove home that evening through the long corridor of interstate that connected Raleigh to Charlotte, listening to the radio without really hearing it, watching the distance markers pass. He thought about the concept document Sienna had asked for, the training program. He thought about the structure of it, the population it would serve, the partnership with certification bodies that would be necessary to make the credentials real. He'd been drafting it in his head for weeks, adding to it and revising it the way he added to and revised everything, slowly and without rushing. He thought about the veterans coming out of military aviation who had hands-on experience that dwarfed most civilian technicians and couldn't get hired because their credentials didn't translate. He thought about the single parents, the career changers, the people for whom a traditional full-time training program was financially and logistically impossible. He thought about what it cost the industry to lose that knowledge, all those people with the ability and the instinct and the commitment who got sorted out of the pipeline by a credentialing system that measured the wrong things. He thought about himself, 3 years ago, choosing small jobs because they were the jobs that fit, and how long that might have gone on. He got home at 7. Carol had fed Lily and helped her with homework and was in the process of gathering her things to drive back to Concord. She paused at the door. "The news was on while Lily was doing her homework," Carol said. "The FAA report." "I saw the headline," Owen said. "Lily asked what it was about." Carol looked at him. "I told her it was about airplanes being safe." "That's accurate," Owen said. "She said she already knew her dad made sure airplanes were safe." Carol picked up her bag. "I thought you should know she said that." Owen stood in the doorway and watched Carol walk to her car. He stood there for a moment after her taillights disappeared around the corner. Lily was at the kitchen table with her book about the girl who talked to horses. She didn't look up when he came in, which meant she was at a good part. He made himself a sandwich and sat across from her and didn't say anything. And she read, and the kitchen was quiet and warm. And outside, somewhere across the city, and across the state, and across the country, 14 aircraft sat in hangars and on tarmacs, most of them already inspected, all of them grounded until they were right. And the work of making them right was going to take as long as it took, and would be done without shortcuts because there was someone now whose job it was to make sure of that. Lily turned a page. "She did it," Lily said without looking up. She finally talked to the horse, and it listened. "Good," Owen said. "It took a long time," Lily said, "but she didn't give up." "That's usually how it works," Owen said. Lily considered that and then turned another page, apparently satisfied. And Owen ate his sandwich and thought about the concept document and the assembly facility and the 14 aircraft and the boy with the gap between his teeth who had asked why you checked twice when you'd never forgotten. And he thought that the answer to that question was maybe the only thing he'd ever known for certain. You checked twice because the work mattered. That was all. It was enough. The concept document took Owen 11 days to write. He worked on it in the margins of everything else. Early mornings before Lily woke up, late evenings after she went to bed, the 30-minute window after dropping her at school when he sat in the truck in the parking lot with his coffee and his laptop, and the particular quiet of a car after a child has just left it. He wrote it the way he did everything, which was carefully and without rushing and with a willingness to go back and revise when something didn't sit right. The document was 23 pages when he finished it. He read through it twice, changed 4 things, and sent it to Sienna on a Tuesday evening at 9:47. She responded at 6:12 the following morning with 2 words, "Call me." He called her from the truck in his driveway before going inside to start breakfast. The sky was the particular gray of November mornings in Charlotte, flat and low, and his breath made a small cloud against the windshield. "I read it twice," she said, without preamble. "Okay," he said. "The 3-tier certification pathway," she said. "The idea of recognizing demonstrated competency alongside formal training hours. Who helped you develop that?" "Nobody," he said. "It's what I would have needed 3 years ago." A pause. "That's what I thought." He heard her moving, the background sound of an office or a hallway. "I want to take this to the board in 2 weeks. I also want to send it to 2 people outside the company first. One is the director of workforce development at the FAA, and one runs a veteran employment organization I've partnered with before. I want their read before the board meeting." "That makes sense," Owen said. "Owen," she said, and something in her voice shifted. Not unprofessional, but less guarded. "This is good. I want you to know that. Not good for a mechanic or good for someone who's never done this before. It's just good." He looked at the gray sky through the windshield. "Thank you," he said. "I'll be in touch," she said, and hung up. He sat in the truck for another minute. Then he went inside and made Lily's breakfast. The FAA's formal investigation report came out in full 6 weeks after the initial findings, which was faster than Owen had expected given the complexity of what the agency was working through. The report ran to 112 pages and covered the R4C revision authorization, the fraudulent delivery inspection documentation, the bracket positioning findings across all 14 aircraft, and the systemic safety culture issues in Ashford Aerospace's manufacturing operations that had allowed individual misconduct to persist without internal detection. Owen read all of it. He read it in the evenings over 3 nights, taking notes in the margins of a printed copy the way he'd been trained early in his career to engage with technical documentation, actively, not just absorbing but interrogating, asking himself at each section whether he understood not just what it said, but why it said it, and what it implied for the work he was now responsible for. The report was thorough. It was also, in places, uncomfortable to read, not because it was wrong, but because it was right. The systemic findings, the culture sections, the parts about how pressure to maintain production timelines had created an environment where nonconformance was rationalized rather than escalated. Those sections had a texture that Owen recognized, not from Ashford Aerospace specifically, which he'd only been associated with for a matter of weeks, from the industry in general, from the specific kind of institutional pressure that accumulated over time in any organization where the schedule mattered and the budget mattered and safety, in practice if not in stated policy, was the thing that bent when the other two needed more room. It was not a comfortable recognition, but it was a useful one, because the useful version of discomfort was the kind that told you where to look. He submitted his own written response to 2 sections of the report. The FAA had asked all key witnesses and subject matter experts to provide written responses to the findings in their area of knowledge, and he was as precise in those 12 pages as he'd been in every conversation and every document that had come before. He described what the assembly facility had looked like when he visited, what the technicians he'd spoken with understood and what they didn't, where the procedural gaps were and where the knowledge was actually solid. He was careful to distinguish between individual misconduct, which was Renner's territory, and systemic failure, which was the company's responsibility and now partly his. He sent the response to Nina Park for review before submitting it. She sent it back with 2 small edits and a note that said, "This is very good. It's going to be quoted." She was right. 2 paragraphs from Owen's written response appeared in the aviation trade press within a week of the FAA publishing the supplemental testimony record. He found out about it when Marcus texted him a link with the message, "You're famous now, man. For real this time." He wasn't famous. 3 aviation industry publications had quoted him, which was different. He mentioned this to Marcus in a reply. Marcus sent back a string of eye roll emoji. Dale Renner's situation resolved itself, legally speaking, the following February, 3.5 months after the repair. He was charged by federal prosecutors with 2 counts related to the falsification of safety documentation and 1 count related to the unauthorized override of an engineering safety recommendation. He did not go to trial. He reached a plea agreement that included a substantial fine, permanent disbarment from any role in federally regulated aviation, and 30 months of probation. Owen heard about the plea agreement on a Thursday afternoon from Nina Park, who called him because she thought he should know before it became public. He listened, thanked her, and then sat at his desk in the Ashford Aerospace Safety Office, a real office now, in the Raleigh facility, with a window that looked out over the assembly floor, and thought about it for a moment. He thought about what 30 months of probation meant compared to what could have happened if the 13 aircraft with potentially compromised brackets had continued to fly. He thought about the specifics, the stress loads, the failure scenarios, the altitude at which a cascading system failure of that type would likely become unrecoverable. He'd run the technical analysis himself, early in the audit process, because he needed to understand the actual risk they'd been dealing with. The numbers were not numbers he'd shared with anyone except Reyes and the FAA investigator, because they were the kind of numbers that, once stated plainly, had a way of becoming the whole story rather than part of it. What they told him was that the margin had been narrower than anyone who wasn't running the technical analysis would have intuitively understood. He thought about Dale Renner, who had probably never run that analysis, who had probably told himself the tolerance revision was minor, the deviation acceptable, the risk managed, who had made the calculation that keeping the line moving was worth the uncertainty, and had been wrong, and had been lucky enough, and unlucky enough, that the full cost of being wrong had arrived as a legal consequence rather than a catastrophic one. He didn't feel satisfaction about the plea agreement. He didn't feel much of anything about it specifically, which was a surprise to him, and then not a surprise. The outcome he'd been working toward was never about Renner. It was about the 14 aircraft and the assembly process, and the systemic culture that had allowed the problem to exist. Renner was the visible point of a much larger issue, and the visible point being resolved didn't resolve the issue. That was what Owen's actual job was for. He went back to the report he'd been writing before Nina's call, a findings memo from his second full audit of the Raleigh assembly floor, which he'd completed the previous week with Torres and 2 external safety consultants he'd brought in specifically because he didn't trust his own potential blind spots. He wrote for another hour, sent the draft to Reyes for technical review, and went home. The board approved the training program in January, 2 months and 3 weeks after Owen had sent Sienna the concept document. The approval came with funding, not just the $7 million from the prize, which had been formally transferred to a separate foundation entity that Owen and Sienna co-chaired, but an additional commitment of $4 million from Ashford Aerospace's operational budget and a matching commitment from the veteran employment organization Sienna had contacted, whose director had read the concept document and called Owen directly to say she wanted in. The program was named the Callahan-Ashford Pathways Initiative, which Owen had argued against and lost. He'd suggested 3 alternative names, all of which Sienna had rejected with the specific patience of a person who had already decided. "The name matters for visibility," she'd told him. "People need to understand this came from somewhere real." He'd said he understood that and still didn't like it. She'd said she knew and put his name on it anyway. The first cohort was 18 people. They started in March. Owen sat in on the orientation. He hadn't planned to. He had enough on his schedule without adding a half-day orientation session. But he'd driven to the facility where the program was based, a partnership with a community college in Charlotte that had the training equipment and was close to the Hargrove facility where the practical hours would take place. And he'd parked in the lot and sat there for a moment with the engine off. Then he'd gone inside. The 18 people in the first cohort ranged from 24 to 51 years old. 7 were veterans, 4 were women. 3 were in the category Owen had thought of most when he was building the framework. People who had significant practical experience, years of it, but whose credentials were incomplete in the specific ways that kept them locked out of the roles their knowledge qualified them for. 2 were single parents who'd arranged their enrollment around child custody schedules that the program's flexible structure was specifically designed to accommodate. The program director, a woman named Gloria Hess, who had 28 years in aviation maintenance and a teaching background that Owen had specifically sought, ran the orientation with a directness and warmth that Owen recognized immediately as the right combination. She knew the work. She knew the people. She didn't talk down to them, and she didn't talk past them. At the end of the orientation, she introduced Owen. He stood up and looked at the 18 people in the room, most of whom were looking at him with the careful attention of people who had been disappointed before and were calibrating whether this was going to be different. He said, "I'm not going to tell you this program is going to be easy. It's going to require real work and real time and real commitment. But everything we've built here is built around the idea that the work you've already done in your lives is worth something, and that what you need is a pathway to make that visible, not a system that makes you start from zero." He paused. "That's it. That's the whole idea. Everything else is just structure around that idea." A man in the second row, one of the veterans, mid-30s, with the particular posture of someone who'd spent time in the military and hadn't entirely stopped sitting that way, said, "How do we know the credentials actually open doors? That the industry's going to recognize them?" It was the right question, the most important question. Owen had expected it and had spent considerable time making sure the answer was solid before he walked into this room. "Because we built the curriculum in consultation with the FAA Certification Division and 3 of the largest aviation employers in the Southeast," he said. "The credentials aren't theoretical, they're negotiated. We have letters of intent from 7 companies, including Ashford Aerospace, committing to recognizing pathway completions in their hiring processes." He looked at the man. "That doesn't guarantee you a job. Nothing guarantees you a job. But the door is real." The man nodded. He had the look of someone who had heard promises before and was doing the math on whether this one was different. Owen respected that. He didn't need the man to believe him on day one. The program would do the work of being credible by being what it said it was, over time, and not before. He stayed for another 30 minutes, answered questions, and then left because he had a flight to catch. Raleigh had a safety audit meeting that afternoon that he couldn't move. He was in the parking lot, halfway to his truck, when someone called after him. He turned. It was the veteran from the second row. "Callahan," the man said. He had a direct face and a handshake that was firm without being performative. "Donnelly. Air Force, 12 years. I did third-line maintenance on C-17s. Owen shook his hand. "What kind of maintenance?" "Structural and hydraulic, some power plant." Donnelly paused. He had the look of someone who had something specific to say and was deciding whether to say it. "I've been trying to get placed for 2 years, got told by 3 different companies that my experience doesn't transfer, that I'd need to start the civilian cert process from the beginning." "I know," Owen said. "Did this happen to you?" Owen looked at him. "Not exactly the same, but close enough." He paused. "That's why the program exists." Donnelly nodded. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the ground, then back up. "I've got 2 kids," he said, 8 and 6. "I've been doing part-time work for 2 years because I couldn't get placed in anything full-time that didn't require more hours away than I can manage." Owen stood there and let that sit for a moment. He wasn't going to smooth it over or rush past it. "The program's structure accommodates that," he said. "The scheduling was built specifically for that situation." "I know," Donnelly said. "I read the materials, that's why I applied." He paused again. "I just wanted to say, the fact that someone built this. I don't take that for granted." Owen looked at him. He thought about what to say and decided the honest thing was the right thing. "Neither do I," he said. "I almost didn't." Donnelly looked at him with the slightly confused expression of a man who had expected a different kind of answer. Owen didn't explain further. He said good luck, and meant it, and got in his truck and drove to the airport. The GX-9 that had started everything, the aircraft that had sat silent in the center bay of the Hargrove hangar on a rainy October night, while 11 engineers looked at its diagnostic readouts, and a temporary mechanic heard something in its engine no one else had bothered to listen for, completed its safety audit in late February. All 14 aircraft in the production run were cleared by that point, re-inspected to the original tolerance specification with documentation that Owen's office had verified independently before signing off. The clearance process had taken 4 months and cost Ashford Aerospace significantly more than the $40 million in delayed revenue Sienna had estimated the day Owen signed his employment papers. The inaugural flight of the flagship aircraft, the specific GX-9 from Hargrove, the one with the story attached to it now, which the press had taken to calling the ghost jet in a way that Owen found slightly irritating and Sienna found mildly useful, was scheduled for a Saturday in early March. Owen almost didn't go. He had work. He had a concept document expansion he was drafting for Phase 2 of the training program. He had a Sunday morning visit from Carol, who was driving down from Concord and would need dinner, which meant grocery shopping. He had the ordinary weight of an ordinary life that had enough in it without adding a ceremonial flight to the schedule. Sienna called him on the Thursday before. "I'd like you there," she said. "I know," he said. "Owen?" "I'll be there," he said. He drove to the Hargrove facility on Saturday morning with Lily in the passenger seat. This had not been the original plan. He'd arranged for Carol to take her, but Lily had heard the word airplane and exhibited a focused, patient 7-year-old's campaign to attend that eventually wore down all resistance. It had not been a dramatic campaign. She'd simply asked, clearly and directly, every day for 4 days, whether she could come. The 5th day, Owen had said yes. She was in her good jacket and her best sneakers and was holding a small backpack that contained, as far as Owen could tell, a book about horses, a granola bar, and a drawing she'd done of an airplane that she'd informed him was a present for the lady from TV. "The lady from TV is Ms. Ashford," Owen said. "I know," Lily said. "Is that okay?" "I think she'll appreciate it," he said. The Hargrove facility on a Saturday morning had a different feel from the weeknight shift where this had all begun. The parking lot was full. There were people Owen knew and people he didn't, and the main bay had been opened in a way that let light come in from the large hangar doors on the tarmac side, and the GX-9 sat on the apron outside, already towed to its departure position, gleaming in the early March light. It had been raining the night Owen fixed it. That night felt both close and very far. He remembered the specific quality of it, the rain on the roof, the work lights, the cold coffee, the sound of someone laughing somewhere behind him when he walked toward the aircraft. He remembered the acoustic signature he'd heard that had stopped him in his tracks. He remembered Lily asleep at home with her arms thrown wide, which was what he'd been thinking about when he made the decision to stop walking and listen. He and Lily found Sienna near the aircraft. She was in conversation with 2 of the pilots and looked up when Owen approached. Her eyes went immediately to Lily, which Owen had expected. "This is Lily," he said. Sienna crouched down, which was not something Owen had seen her do before, and looked at Lily directly. "Hi, Lily," she said. "I'm Sienna." Lily looked at her with the careful assessment of a 7-year-old making up her mind. "I brought you something," she said, and reached into her backpack and pulled out the drawing. Sienna took it. She looked at it for a moment. The crayon airplane, the small figures standing beside it, the fact that Lily had labeled one of the figures Dad in large, slightly uneven letters. Something moved in Sienna's face that she didn't hide quickly enough. She cleared it. "This is really good," she said. She looked at Lily. "Can I keep it?" "Yes," Lily said. "I made it on purpose for you." Sienna folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of her blazer. "I'm going to keep it in there," she told Lily, patting the pocket. "Right here," Lily nodded, satisfied, and then lost interest in the conversation and turned to look at the aircraft, which was far more interesting. Owen watched his daughter look at the GX-9, the size of it, the clean lines, the way the morning light moved across the wing surfaces. And he saw on her face the specific expression that children had when they encountered something large enough to genuinely impress them. Not performance, just real. Reyes appeared at Owen's shoulder. "Ready?" he said. "Yeah," Owen said. Reyes looked at Lily. "Does she want to see the flight deck?" Lily heard the word flight deck and looked at Owen with an expression that answered the question. They spent 20 minutes on the flight deck where the 2 pilots, a man named Garza and a woman named Park, who shared Nina Park's last name but was not related to her, which Owen had confirmed because it seemed like the kind of thing that would come up. Walked Lily through the instrument panels with patience that went significantly beyond what the occasion required. Garza pointed out the attitude indicator and explained what it did. Park showed her the thrust controls and explained in simplified terms how the engines responded. Lily asked 7 questions, most of which were better than the questions adults typically asked. When they climbed back down the boarding steps to the apron, Marcus was waiting at the bottom, grinning. "You brought the kid," he said. "She campaigned for it," Owen said. "Smart kid." Marcus looked at Lily. "Hey, Lily." Lily looked at him. "You work with my dad?" "I used to," Marcus said. "He works somewhere fancier now." "The airplanes are the same," Lily said seriously. Marcus laughed. "Yeah," he said. "They are." The flight was not long, a demonstration loop, roughly 2 hours, taking the GX-9 out over the coast and back. 53 people were on board. Sienna, 4 board members. Daniel Reyes, a delegation from the FAA, including investigator Holtz, 6 of the 12 clients who'd taken delivery of GX-9s in the compromised production run, a group of journalists, and, in the last 4 seats, arranged by Sienna without telling Owen until the morning, the 4 technicians from the Raleigh assembly facility who had participated most actively in the safety culture rebuild, including Pavlik, the woman at the tolerance verification station who'd walked him through her process on his first day. Owen was not on the flight. He'd been invited. He'd declined. Sienna had looked at him when he declined. Why? He'd thought about how to say it honestly. "Because my job isn't the flight," he said. "My job is what has to happen before the flight, so the flight is safe. If I did it right, the flight should be boring." She'd looked at him for a long moment. "You know there are people who would want the recognition," she said. "You've earned it." "I'm not saying I don't want it," he said. "I'm saying the recognition that means something to me isn't standing on the flight deck." He paused. "Let the technicians have it. The ones who rebuilt the process. They're the ones who are going to make every aircraft after this one safe." She'd looked at him. Then she'd nodded and changed the boarding manifest. He stood on the apron and watched the aircraft taxi to the runway. Lily was beside him. He'd brought a pair of ear protection for her, the large over-ear kind that made her look like she was wearing enormous headphones, and she was wearing them around her neck, ready, watching the aircraft move with the full attention she gave to things that interested her. Torres was standing a few feet to Owen's left. They'd driven from Raleigh together that morning, which had involved 2 hours in a car during which Torres had gradually stopped being cautious around Owen and started being something closer to direct, which Owen found more useful. Torres was a good engineer. He was going to be a good partner once he fully trusted that Owen wasn't there to audit him personally, but to fix the system around him. "Nervous?" Torres said, looking at the aircraft. "No," Owen said. "I'm a little nervous," Torres said. He said it like an admission. "That's fine," Owen said. "Being a little nervous means you understand what's at stake." Torres looked at him. "Is that something you believe or something you tell people?" Owen thought about it. "Both," he said. Torres almost smiled. "Fair enough," he said. The GX-9 reached the runway threshold. The pilots ran the pre-takeoff checks. Owen could see from the ground, through the cockpit windows, the movement that meant the checklist was being run properly, thoroughly, the way it was supposed to be. He watched that and felt something settle in him. Then the engine spooled up. He heard the change in tone immediately, the climb from idle to takeoff power, the specific acoustic signature of 2 healthy engines working together in full coordination. No resonance, no off note. Clean and even and correct, in the precise way that correct sounded when you'd spent enough years listening for the difference. Lily took her ear protection off her neck and put it on her ears without being told, which was a thing she'd picked up from somewhere. From watching him, probably. He put his own on. The aircraft rolled. It accelerated down the runway with the unhurried inevitability of something large and well-engineered doing exactly what it was designed to do. And at the point where speed and lift and angle of attack aligned in the precise relationship that produced flight, it left the ground. Owen watched it climb. It went up cleanly, steeply, the way the GX-9 was designed to climb. Briskly, without labor, the wings finding the air with confidence. It banked slightly south and continued climbing, and in a few minutes was small enough against the March sky that you had to know where to look to keep track of it. Lily watched it go until it was out of sight. Then she lowered her eyes and looked at Owen with the straightforward curiosity she applied to everything. "Did you fix that one?" she said. "I fixed it once," he said. "A lot of other people made sure it stayed fixed." She thought about that. "So it took more than 5 minutes," she said. He looked at her. "A little more than 5 minutes," he said. She nodded. This seemed to satisfy her. She looked back at the empty sky where the aircraft had been, and then at the runway, and then at the hangars, taking in the whole landscape of the place with the systematic attention of a child cataloging something she expected to remember. Owen stood beside her and let the morning be what it was. He thought about the night 5 months ago when he'd almost walked past. He thought about what turns on the particular attention you did or didn't bring to any given moment, on the quality of listening you were capable of on a rainy October night when you were tired and you had cold coffee and you wanted to go home. He thought about the fact that almost never announced itself. It arrived looking like an ordinary moment, and you either noticed it or you didn't. He'd noticed it, not because he was exceptional, because he'd spent 14 years learning to pay attention to things that didn't announce themselves. That was the whole of it. That was the only thing he knew for certain that was worth knowing, and he'd been trying to figure out how to build it into a training program and a safety protocol and a set of institutional practices that would outlast his own involvement, because the thing about genuine safety culture was that it couldn't live in one person. One person noticing wasn't a system. It was luck, and luck ran out. He thought about Donnelly, the veteran with the 2 kids. He thought about the 17 other people in the first cohort working through the certification pathway in Charlotte right now. He thought about the concept document for the second phase sitting on his desk, about the expansion to 2 additional cities Sienna had proposed for next year. He thought about Rachel. He didn't push the thought away. He let it arrive and settle the way he'd learned to let it arrive, which was not without pain, but with a kind of patience about the pain that he hadn't had at first. She'd been gone 3 years and 5 months. Some mornings the house felt like itself. Some mornings it felt like the absence of something. He'd learned to live in both versions of the same house, which was not a thing he'd chosen and was also, he'd come to understand, not a thing that could be undone by wishing it differently. What remained was Lily, who was standing beside him now in her good jacket and her best sneakers, watching a piece of sky where an aircraft had just been. What remained was the work. What remained was the fact that somewhere in the sky to the southeast, a $42 million aircraft was climbing through 15,000 feet on its inaugural flight, carrying people who trusted that the machine beneath them had been built correctly and maintained correctly and inspected correctly, and that trust was not misplaced because someone had paid attention, and the someone who had paid attention had then spent 5 months making sure attention was built into the system so it didn't depend on any one person on any one rainy night. You couldn't make safety out of heroism. Owen had known that for a long time, and the last 5 months had confirmed it in every direction. Heroism was what you needed when the system failed. The goal was a system that made heroism unnecessary, that ran the checklist and verified the tolerance and asked the question twice and filed the documentation not because someone was watching, but because the people inside the system understood that the alternative was unacceptable. That was the work. It was not dramatic. It was daily and specific and repetitive and unfinished and would remain unfinished, which was not a failure. It was the nature of the thing. "Dad," Lily said. "Yeah." "Can I get a hot chocolate?" There was a thing inside with hot chocolate. He looked down at her. The good jacket, the enormous ear protection now, back around her neck, the small face turned up to him with the uncomplicated directness of a person who had looked at a piece of sky long enough and was now thinking about hot chocolate. He felt the familiar weight of her, the specific gravity of her presence in any room, on any apron, in any ordinary moment. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go get hot chocolate." She took his hand. Not because she needed to. She was 7, not 4, and she was fully capable of walking across an apron independently. She took it because she wanted to, which was the better reason, and they walked back toward the hangar together in the March morning light. Torres fell into step on Owen's other side. "I was thinking about the second phase document," he said, in the tone of a man who'd been waiting to bring something up and had decided this was a reasonable moment. "The part about on-site mentorship pairing for the new cohort. I had an idea." Tell me, Owen said. Torres told him. The idea was good. Better than good, actually. It addressed a gap in the mentorship structure that Owen had noticed but hadn't resolved. He told Torres that. Torres looked like he'd been waiting to hear someone say his idea was good and was going to spend a few minutes being careful not to show how much it meant to him. Owen understood that feeling completely. They went inside. Lily found the hot chocolate. Marcus appeared from somewhere and started telling Lily a story about the time he'd seen an eagle land on the nose of a parked Learjet, which was probably not true, but was extremely well told. And Lily listened with her hands around her cup and the serious attention she gave to things that interested her. Owen stood slightly apart and watched the hangar. The people, the aircraft in their bays, the ordinary mid-morning life of a maintenance facility running normally, everyone doing their specific jobs with the focused competence that real work required. Holtz, the FAA investigator, appeared at Owen's shoulder with the quiet arrival of a man who'd spent 22 years materializing in rooms without announcing himself. He had a cup of coffee and the expression of someone who was almost but not entirely done thinking about something. "Good flight so far," Holtz said. He was tracking it on his phone. "Yeah," Owen said. "Clean telemetry. Pilots are happy." He paused. "You're not on it?" "No," Owen said. "By choice." "Yes." Holtz looked at the hangar floor for a moment. "When I was starting out," he said, "I had a supervisor who told me the best sign of a good investigation was that it made itself unnecessary." He paused. "Meaning, you find the problem, you trace it back, you fix the root, and if you do it right, that specific problem doesn't happen again." He looked at Owen. "I think about that a lot. The idea of work that succeeds by eliminating the need for itself." Owen looked at the hangar. He thought about that. "The problem is that aviation is complicated enough that there's always a next problem," he said. "You fix the root of one thing and something else is growing in a different corner." "Sure," Holtz said, "but the principle holds. You fix it thoroughly enough, at the root, and the specific failure mode is gone." He sipped his coffee. "What you've built here, the audit process, the culture rebuild, the training program, that's root work." Owen didn't say anything for a moment. I was watching Lily, who had finished her hot chocolate and was asking Marcus a follow-up question about the eagle and the Learjet. He was watching Torres, who was at a workstation reviewing something on a tablet with the focus of a man who had a good idea and was now thinking about the next one. "I hope so," Owen said finally. He meant it precisely as he said it. Not false modesty, not performance. Genuine uncertainty about whether what he'd built was enough, held alongside the genuine commitment to keep building it until it was. Holt seemed to understand the distinction. He nodded. He finished his coffee. "I'll leave you to it," he said, and moved off toward the other side of the hangar. Owen stood there a moment longer. Then Marcus finished the eagle story and Lily turned around and spotted Owen across the hangar and started walking toward him, unhurried, in the particular way she moved through spaces she was comfortable in, and the GX-9 was somewhere at altitude over the Atlantic coast running clean and even, and in Charlotte, the first cohort was in its second week of training, and in Raleigh, the assembly floor was running the revised tolerance verification protocol that Pavlik had helped refine, and Torres was sketching something on his tablet about mentorship pairing, and the work was unfinished and would remain unfinished, and that was not a problem. That was just the shape of it. Lily read him and looked up. "Can we go see the runway?" she said. "Where it takes off from?" "Sure," he said. "Let me tell Torres where we're going," he told Torres. Torres nodded without looking up from his tablet and said something about stopping by the parts room after. Owen said he would. He walked back to Lily, who was waiting near the hangar door with the patience of a person who had decided she was going to get what she wanted and was therefore in no hurry. They walked out onto the apron together, into the March light, and Owen pointed to the runway threshold where the GX-9 had begun its roll that morning. That specific strip of tarmac where a machine had accelerated from stillness to flight, where the physics of lift had taken over from the physics of ground, where something heavy and complicated and built from years of human effort had decided to climb. Lily stood at the edge of the apron and looked at the runway with her hands in her jacket pockets and her chin slightly raised, in the posture she had when she was concentrating on something. "It went from here," she said. "From right there," Owen said. She looked at it for a moment. "And you fixed it," she said, "so it could." He looked at the runway. He thought about saying something that addressed the full complexity of it, the months of work, the audits and the documentation, and the training program, and the rebuilt processes, and all the other people who had made the flight possible. He thought about saying that it wasn't really about him. Instead, he looked at his daughter standing in the morning light with her chin up and her hands in her pockets, 7 years old, entirely serious, asking the simplest possible version of the question. "Yeah," he said, "so it could." She nodded once, the way she nodded when a thing was confirmed and could be filed away. Then she looked at the empty sky and seemed to think about something privately for a moment, and then she turned and started walking back toward the hangar. "Come on," she said. "Torres was going to show me a real engine." Owen looked at the runway for another second. Then he turned and followed her.